All right, Notre Dame fans, we are back for another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we're going to talk football today. I know signing day is a week away, and we'll have plenty of recruiting topics to talk about over the next week, but Notre Dame's got a pretty important bowl game to play here, and we don't want to forget that, and we're going to talk a lot about that. And yesterday we talked about the Notre Dame offense, Ryan, and today we're going to talk about the Notre Dame defense because this is a very intriguing unit. It was the unit that was primarily responsible for a lot of Notre Dame's success this year. I would say that unit plus the offensive line. The other part of it, however, is even though the defense played good football for most of the year, I think in a lot of ways it underachieved. And I think that a lot of what we saw this year was just because they happen to have pretty good players. And those good players, in spite of some other issues, I thought did what they needed to do to win games. It was a very strange year. We didn't see this defense get ripped up until the last game of the year. At least not for a full game. You know, there's the bad half against Navy and things like that. But for the most part, this defense played good football all year. It never played great. It just played solid football. And I think it underachieved. And so now you go into the bowl prep and you say, okay, well, what can you do to start fixing that? And what can you do to start building some momentum going into the next season, Ryan? Because you're going to not have Isaiah Foskey, who's declared for the NFL draft. You're not going to have Cam Hart, who is injured. So you look at it and say, okay, well, this is going to give us somewhat of there's a chance they may not have Jason Ademiyola, who's trying to get healthy for the game, but that's questionable at this time from what I'm told from sources. So there's a chance this is going to look a lot different than what it was during the season. There's going to be some veterans out there that get their last crack at playing, and that's important. I want to see Tariq Bracy get that opportunity, Ryan. But at the same time, this is a situation where the defense has to start, number one, showing that it can be dominant, and number two, needs to start doing a better job of getting more of the young talent on the field. You can't say the defense did get young talent on the field because the secondary certainly did with Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey, but maybe not quite enough of it at certain spots, mainly linebacker, which, we'll discuss. But I just think overall, Ryan, as we get into the conversation of what we want to see from the defense in the bowl game, we're going to get into a lot of specifics, but I think the overarching thing for me, and I'll let you respond to it, I felt like the biggest holdup on defense all season, Ryan, was twofold. Number one, they kind of build on each other. Number one, I felt like the way that Al Golden coached all year was an overemphasis on scheme. I think one of the discussions can be fans get so disinterested with the importance of scheme that it's just all about the players. It is not. Coaching matters. Scheme matters. Putting guys in position to be successful matters. You can err on the side of underdoing it, but I feel like Notre Dame erred on the side of overdoing it to the point where I felt like the players weren't turned loose. There was too much thinking. And I think the second part of that, Ryan, is when you overemphasize scheme more often than not, it's a situation where you're trying to play a more NFL style of football, in my opinion, which is more read and react, limit big plays, just it's more passive, I guess. I'll let you kind of explain that more. You watch a lot more NFL than I do, but when I do study NFL film, when I do look at those type of things, that's what I see. Defenses that are more trying to manage what's happening as opposed to dictating. NFL offenses are too good, too complex to set the tone defensively in a lot of instances. I don't agree that's true in college. I think you need to be more of an aggressive tone setter on defense in college, and we didn't see that this year. And those two things to me were what I felt kept the defense from being as good as it should have been at a lot of times this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're talking about the NFL side of things, I mean, I mentioned in our pre-show, I'm a Rams fan, right? So I remember Brandon Staley when he was a defensive coordinator for the Rams, who's now the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. That defense played really well that year. And I feel like I think you said it yesterday in the show, right, Brian? Like the NFL is a copycat league, right? Like that's
always has been.
That's what it is. And they see successes that people like Brandon Staley have where their scope is give me Jalen Ramsey, give me Aaron Donald, and I am going to play off of you. Let my guys be guys, but they want offenses to have put together long drives, a lot of plays, 8, 9, 10 play drives, because the thought process is the more plays that the offense runs, the more opportunity they have to make a mistake. That's where it comes down to, right? If you only have a 4-play drive, you have less of a chance to make a mistake than if you have a 10-play drive. I mean, it's just, again, it's law of averages. And I think that's where the NFL is right now. And I do think there's something to that as far as, I mean, we can't discount that Al Golden has been in the NFL for several years before this, right? That's where his ties have been. He was just a linebacker coach for a team in Cincinnati, the Bengals, that kind of run similar kind of philosophy. You know, they're going to play a little off coverage. They're going to let teams make mistakes, you know, in longer drives. So I think
we can't also dismiss who his head coach was when he was a defensive coordinator the last time. It was Al Groh, who came from the NFL, who did a lot of very NFL-ish type of things when he was at UVA. So I think it's those two things combined. Mm-hmm. And look, Al Golden did a good job this year. And he did not do a bad job. We're not saying did a bad job. We're not saying the defense was bad. We started off at the very beginning saying the defense was a primary driver of the team's success. But it's not about saying, okay, well, if that's true, then, well, we just have to accept whatever happened. No, it needed to be better. And to your point, you watch him play, Ryan, and you can't help but be like, yeah, this isn't what the best teams on defense in college are doing. This doesn't even really fit. I'll give you an example, and you can speak to this.
Yep.
One of the things when I first got concerned, it was during the Marshall week. Because what was the question that I asked after the Ohio State game? I said, let's see if Al Golden can be this good when he's only got a week to prepare. Because there was a lot of complexity in that scheme against Ohio State, especially coverage-wise. A lot of complexity, which is what threw C.J. Stroud off that game. But can you do this when you only have 4 practices basically to prepare as opposed to an entire offseason?
Sure.
And that was an issue at times. It led to why they weren't good at halftime adjustments. Like if the defense came out playing well early, they were just going to play well for the most part. But if teams started to find holes, we didn't see this defense counterpunch a lot schematically because I feel like they put so much into the scheme that it was hard to then go and when you have complex stuff and complex adjustments, it's hard to then add new complex adjustments in 15 minutes at halftime.
Right.
And so what I was told, and I made you aware of this at the time, I was told by multiple sources, at least 2 off the top of my head that I can think of, might have been 3, that called me up on Wednesday and they were like, yeah, this is strange. I'm like, okay, what's up? They're like, yeah, so they came in today and completely changed the defensive game plan. And they said that they were switching from a run-oriented game plan to a pass-oriented game plan. I'm thinking, hold on a second. I didn't even know that was a thing, right? Like, I didn't know that was a thing in college. And I'm thinking, first of all, have you watched Marshall? Did you watch Marshall against Norfolk State? Have you seen their quarterback? Why would you be focusing on a pass-oriented game plan? What we said was shut down the run and make Henry Columbia beat you. Yep. And they didn't do that. They allowed Marshall to run all over him, and that's why they lost the game. And so, but the bigger problem was that doesn't make any sense to me. You're switching from a run-oriented game plan to a pass game-oriented game plan. This is college football, man. You got to be able to play both. And what we saw this season is this team against good teams had a hard time shutting down both. They stopped the Ohio State pass game and left themselves completely vulnerable to the run in the second half. Yeah, they kept the Marshall pass game in check for the most part, but they allowed them to just run it all over them, right? Yeah, they kept Caleb Williams from ripping off a bunch of big pass game numbers. He didn't throw for a ton of yards. He didn't make a ton of big plays in the pass game, but then that made them vulnerable to the run game. The Austin Jones runs for a bunch of yards, and then it also made them vulnerable to Caleb Jones throwing the football. And so we saw a lot of those things this year, Ryan, where they had trouble kind of playing both well. They were kind of, we'll take one away and just hope that the other one doesn't rip us up. And I think that that's something that I think is problematic. And I think it leads to that early thought of, well, in college, you got to be able to play both, right? When you play the Kansas City Chiefs, you got to figure out a way to shut down the pass game, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they're going to run it on you 40 times, great. That means Patrick Mahomes isn't throwing it. That's a win, right? That's not the case in college, where teams just tend to be more balanced. And I think that is something that I feel like is going to need to be an adjustment for Coach Golden as he does get back into being more of the college game, is to understand that you have to be able to be good at both, and it has to be more player driven. I think that was something that concerned me, Ryan, and we saw that, in my opinion, we saw that play out all year, which is just more of a and it just reminded me more and more and more of kind of what you have seen from the NFL the last decade, as opposed to what you see from successful college teams.
Well, and with this bowl game coming up, Brian, to your point, where Isaiah Foskey's not playing, Cam Hart's not playing, Jason Amola may not play. We'll see what the end result is there. You're gonna it's a litmus test for Coach Golden, because now you can't just say, okay, we're gonna do what we do, but then when we need a big moment, Isaiah Foskey's gonna make it, right? Or Jason Amola is gonna make a big play, or our stars are gonna save us, right? You're going to be playing a lot of younger guys, more than you were anyway. You're going to be playing players that have not been thrust into that star role, that have to be money players to make a big play when it matters most. So I think this is a big test for Al Golden, because this is going to show a lot of what, if there is a changing of identity, right? Like, I think that there could be, does it stay the same? Is there any new nuances to the game? I think that we're going to see a lot in this bowl game. So I actually think it's an evaluation period of what the defense's identity is going to be moving forward. Does he understand that some things that he did not work well, and he has to make adjustments? And you talked about the lack of adjustments during game. I want to see if there's adjustments from these 15 practices, from this after season now to bowl game perspective, right? Like, I think that those things matter. And I think that it's going to be an interesting just case study to see how this defense is going to operate, because you can't just lean on your stars in this game, right? You have to find players that can make plays in certain instances and put them in the position to make the play. So that's what I'm most curious about, is just how much growth he'll have, because there is part of me that says we knew coming into this year that Al Golden hadn't been a defensive coordinator in a long time, right? That had not happened. So, does he start to get this turned around? Do adjustments start getting made? Or is what we saw this year what he is? Is that all that Al Golden is as a defensive coordinator? Again, not a bad defensive coordinator. I fought back against somebody in the chat yesterday or the day before where they were saying that he's a bad defensive coordinator. I'm like, no, he's a good defensive coordinator. The question is if he's a great defensive coordinator or an elite defensive coordinator. Those things, I don't know right now, but we'll see.
Or even really good. I mean,
yeah, sure.
I don't know if, I don't think Clark Lee was elite. I have a very small number of people that are elite. What he was, however, was really good. I don't know if I would call Marcus Freeman an elite defensive coordinator, because we didn't see him at Notre Dame long enough, right? He was borderline that level, that way in the AAC, but at Notre Dame, it was one season. It was a pretty good season. It started off, you had some of the new system issues that then bled into the first month, but then after that, the last month of the season, they were really, really good. To me, it's Mike Elko was really good. So you've had 3 straight really good defensive coordinators. Al Golden wasn't there this year, in my opinion. But I think there's a lot of things that have to make you say, okay, that's the analysis of what it was in 2022. It doesn't mean that that's always going to be who he is. To your point, he hasn't been a coordinator in a long time. He is adjusting to the college game. The question is, will he be willing to adjust to the college game, or is he going to double down and say, well, once the players get more time in our scheme, they'll understand it better? That's the concern. Sure. And with guys that are really smart scheme-wise, and make no mistake, Al Golden is really, really smart scheme-wise. The concern is that they don't go back on it. They just say, well, as we get more kids that fit our system, or as kids get more experience in the system, they'll do better. And I hope that that's not the case. I hope it's a happy medium. The kids will pick up more, and you will have the ability to do some more things as they get more experience in your system.
Yep.
But And I think it's especially at the linebacker level is really a big part of this. I think the linebacker and safety play is pretty complex. Corner, not so much. It's just go
Right.
be a dude, and that's good.
Yeah.
I felt like the defensive line. Well, we'll kind of dive into some of the specifics a little bit, Ryan. But this is the first chance we're going to get to see if he is willing to make some of those adjustments. Because there's two ways to look at this bowl game, and it was popping in my head as you were kind of talking about what they're not going to have. You're going to say, well, we don't have Isaiah Foskey. We don't have Cam Hart. We may not have Jason Adamiola. So we've got to really double down on getting real creative with our scheme to make sure we don't get ripped. That's one way of looking at it. That's my concern. That's my worst fear scenario, is that they say, well, we don't have our dudes in this game, so we can't afford to let the guys play because we don't have our best guys in the field. The flip side is, okay, yeah, you don't have those guys, but what do you have? And what you do have is still some pretty good football players, some young ones, but some pretty good football players. So do less. Make sure that they know exactly what they're doing. Very fundamentally sound. You know what your checks are. You know what your alignments are. You know what your job is. Limit the scheme. Emphasize playing fast and flying to the ball. And then any mistakes they may make, allow their athleticism and speed to make up for those mistakes, and allow the aggressiveness to make up for those mistakes. That's the opposite side. And so what I'm curious to see is, where does Al Golden fit in this spectrum, right? Is he over here, in the middle? That's going to tell us a lot about, just like we talked about yesterday. If Tommy Reese just comes out on the 30th and just same old, then it's like, well, maybe that is who he is, right? I don't understand why he would do that, but maybe that is who he is. Or is he going to come out and say, okay, we've got to make some adjustments based on who we have and who, and what we don't have anymore, but focus on what we have. And we're going to come out and we're going to do A, B, C, and D. It's going to be fun. We're going to move the ball. We're going to score some points, and we're going to get ready to go into next year.
Sure.
Same thing's true here. Is Al Golden going to say, well, we don't have this, so let's just hopefully go out and just kind of get through this, and then we'll make some adjustments in the offseason? Or are they going to use this opportunity to say, hey, look, let's do some things. Let's get Jalen Sneed teed up. Let's get Nolan Ziegler teed up. Let's get Gabriel Rubio ready to go. Let's get, Josh Burnham maybe ready to give you 5-10 snaps in this game. Let's get Jordan Patelho and see what he can do as an edge rusher. Let's see what Justin Adamiola can do as a pure Viper instead of a hybrid guy that moves all around. But let's let these kids go play and play fast. Let's whatever role Marist has, limit what he's being asked to do and just go, right? Those are things that I want to see, Ryan.
Yeah.
And if we don't see those, it's going to tell me, okay, he doesn't think he's the problem. He thinks it's the lack of experience that kids have in his system. It's, well, we don't have the length that I want. We don't have this that I want. We don't have that I want, right? That's the excuses we've heard in the past. Well, why don't you do this? Well, we don't have this. We don't have that. Okay. Or is it, you know what? This is what we have. This is how we can maximize these kids' ability, as opposed to how can these kids maximize my scheme? I think big picture, that's going to be the biggest thing that we're going to see. Let's dive into some practicalities of it. I think the first question mark is going to be answered up front. If you don't have Foskey, there's going to be a desire by a coach whose scheme. What do scheme-driven coaches primarily use their defensive line for? Occupying blocks to free up the schemed stuff, right? Linebacker fires, safety fires, corner fires, stuff like that, right? Isn't that kind of how it is?
Yeah.
Right?
Occupy blocks, let other guys flow. Yeah.
Right. And so you don't have Foskey. So does he say, okay, well, now we've really got to double down on that? Or is he going to say, okay, we've got Patelho, we've got Justin Adamiola, we've got, some of these kids. Howard Cross is healthy. He's had a good year. We got Riley Mills. Let's turn him loose. Let's figure out ways to say, let's let these kids go play, and that's going to be the first. If we come out and see these guys two-gapping and eating up blocks for the linebackers, then we're going to know nothing has changed. So that's the first thing for me, Ryan, is I want to see him turn this defensive line loose a little bit. And I think against this particular matchup, I think that would make a lot of sense when you look at the quarterback and the offensive
Yes.
line that South Carolina has, Ryan.
I mean, no doubt about that. I mean, if you've watched the South Carolina offensive line this year, they have some size up front, but this has kind of been the running trend of them over the last few years. They have big guys at the offensive line position, but they don't have great feats, right? So I think you've seen that against the better defenses they've played. There's a lot of pressure that's able to be made up front, and that's both in as a pass rusher, that's both in the run game as far as just giving up that penetration. That's the offensive line. And then Spencer Rattler, he's a talented kid, great thrower of the football as far as just pure arm strength and wicked quick release, all those great things. But we know that Spencer Rattler he's not great against chaos. He's not great against pressure. He folds a little bit in the pocket. He does at times, right? When the game comes quick, he'll settle on that back foot. He'll throw off his back foot. He'll do those things. We've seen Spencer Rattler have issues with turnovers. We've seen him have issues with those types of things. So this is a game, which has been the case for most of the year, where you want to play a more one gap style, right? Like your defensive line, you want to be aggressive, shoot gaps, create penetration. And Brian, I mean, it's maddening to me that there have been moments this year where you're just like, yes, they have just tried to occupy blocks when we knew going into the year, they don't have a lot of size at the interior defensive line spot into the season, right? Like Riley Mills is a defensive end, obviously in this system now. So they're working with guys that are 6'1", 270 something pounds, and Howard Cross. And then, I mean, Jason Amalola is the big guy at 6'2" and a half and 285 pounds, right? Like you don't have a ton of size inside. So my initial thought would be, well, kill him with speed, kill him with quickness.
Right.
That's how you beat him. And I think in this game, that doesn't change. None of your the fact that Notre Dame should be a one gap style defense that is a penetration laden system should not change in this football game, because you're going against a not great offensive line. Their best running back has already opted out of this football game. Their quarterback does not handle pressure very well. Attack him, man. Attack him.
Let's look at some numbers, right? So let's talk about the quarterbacks that Notre Dame has faced this year. Okay, and just kind of put this into context, because I think context is the best way to show things. We can say, hey, well, he's not good here, he's not good there, but let's actually kind of talk about it, okay? So let's first of all look at Notre Dame's quarterback, Drew Pine. This year, Notre Dame, Drew Pine, this is using Pro Football Focus numbers. So again, what do we always say about Pro Football Focus? Grading system sucks. Data collection is pretty good. Would you agree with that, Ryan? Okay. Drew Pine this year, when under pressure, he had 87 dropbacks where he was under pressure. He threw 60 passes in those situations, completed 53.3% of his passes, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception, average 7.4 yards per attempt.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Not bad.
It's actually not bad at all.
Yeah, it's not bad. You'd like to see maybe a few more big plays, but I think that's just a byproduct of sort of the different things that they did schematically, which had to protect him in some other instances. So you kind of understand it a little bit, right? So let's go to some other quarterbacks that Notre Dame played this year, Ryan. And I'm going to go next to Drake May, who I thought was a pretty good player, and I thought a kid that got pressured a decent amount this year. Would you agree with that, especially late in the year?
Yep.
Drake May, a lot more pressure. So Drake May was under pressure on 219 snaps this season, which is well over half. So Drew Pine pressure on 87 dropbacks where he was pressured, 207 dropbacks where he was not pressured. Okay, Drake May, I'm sorry, it's trying to think what's total dropback numbers. It's about half of his dropbacks. Okay. He was pressured 219 times and kept clean 378 times. Drake May completed 444% of his passes, 6.6 yards per attempt, 10 touchdowns, 4 picks. Not great, right? Huh. Caleb Williams went under pressure this year. 178 dropbacks where he was pressured, 337 where he was kept clean. 52.5% completion, which is okay, but he averaged 8.7 yards per attempt, 13 touchdowns, no picks. That's really clutch under pressure, right? Yes. CJ Stroud this year, not great. This was an issue for CJ Stroud this year. He was only pressured 80 times and kept clean 299 times. But he only completed 40.6% of his throws and 5.7 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, 2 picks. Right? Not good.
No.
Here's Spencer Rattler.
Oh, no.
He was pressured on 138 dropbacks and kept clean on 283 dropbacks. He completed 33% of his passes. So what we showed you, the spectrum of the really good to the not great. 33% completion rate when pressured, 4.8 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, 7 interceptions.
Yuck.
And he had 12 turnover-worthy plays, which is an 8.7% number. Stroud had 7. Caleb Williams had 4. Drake May had the most at 10 of that, and that was on 219 dropbacks compared to 138 for Spencer Rattler, and Drew Pine had 2. So that's the data, Ryan, to back up what you just said. When Spencer Rattler gets pressured, and I'm not talking blitzes because he's actually got decent numbers against the blitz. When blitzed, he completes 59.2% of his passes, 5 touchdowns, and 4 picks. All right, because when you blitz a guy, his decision-making is easier because it's a bunch of one-on-ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you pressure him with 4- and 5-man pressures or zone fires where you've got more guys in coverage, that's when he struggles. And so the numbers tell the story, Ryan, which is this is not a guy that you want to just let sit back to a clean pocket. And it's not necessarily the answer to go out and heat him up with 6-7 guys. So the answer is, can your offensive line or defensive line put pressure on him? Mm-hmm. Can you find ways to do 4-man zone fires with your linebackers? Where you maybe a blitz Marist off the edge and drop Jason Adamiola into coverage, that kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to be the question that we're gonna find out in this game, Ryan, is whether or not he can do that, and whether or not he can find ways to, keep his team or keep that quarterback off balance. And when you talk about pass protection, an offensive line that you said is big, but not the most mobile line. They ranked 82nd in the country this year in sacks allowed. So that's going to be a big key, and that's going to be very telling about whether or not Al Golden is willing to kind of let this team kind of pin their ears back and go play. Is that right there? Does he let him heat him up with the front first, right? Because if the front's aggressive, Ryan, I believe this. If the front's aggressive, it makes blitz pressures so much more effective. That's part of the reason why Brent Venables' blitzes at Clemson were so effective with linebackers, is because they weren't blitzing where their defensive linemen were eating up gaps. Their defensive linemen were pushing, and then the linebackers are coming right behind him. So once the linebacker got through the line of scrimmage, he was already 2-3 yards past the where the ball was snapped. Where Notre Dame's kind of stalemating, and then the linebackers are trying to get through like at the line of scrimmage or like a yard in. That's going to be key number one for me, and sign number one of whether or not Al Golden is starting to maybe look at what they did this year, spend some time self-scouting and say, we did some good things this year. They did some good things, but what kept us from really taking that next step and then start to make those adjustments? And to me, this is step number one.
It's also a misuse of what you have from a player perspective too. I mean, because like I said, and like you just kind of reiterated, South Carolina does have a big offensive line. It's just not overly athletic. So if you have a clear athleticism advantage and you're a little bit undersized up front, I mean, what are we doing, right? Like, why are you asking guys to play straight down a man and anchor against double teams and do that type of stuff? Like, it's not going to let Howard Cross be as good as he can be. It's not going to let whoever is playing the other defensive tackle spot be as good as they possibly can, right? Your defensive ends, you lose length, obviously, with Isaiah Foskey out, but you still have some good athletes at defensive end, man. Like Justin Amalola can move. If it's Joshua Burnham, if it's Aiden Gobaira getting a little bit of PT, if it's Jordan Botelho, like you have some speed, you have some athleticism. So limiting those guys to be two-gapping type players to play straight down a man, that's not using skill sets to the best advantage, right? It's common sense for everyone. Do I want 6 foot, 270 pound Howard Cross playing straight down a 6'5", 320 pound man? Like that's not going to work in his favor. But what can work in his favor is, hey, let's get a little movement up front, maybe slants across that guy's face. Now he is able to clear that block and get into the backfield because that guy doesn't have the ability to recover against the quickness of Howard Cross. Those are the ways to take advantage of what you have up front. And I mean, Brian, honestly, it's a really bad sign that we're having this conversation 13 games into the season. I mean, it is.
Well,
it
we
really
saw
is.
we saw it at times.
I
right?
know.
I mean, at times he would let them go, and that's when they would take over games. And it was really a decent number of times we would see him do this. But then they'd get into situations in the second half where they'd have a lead and they'd go away from it, or they'd get into situations. It was almost like, I don't want to say this. I don't want to say that they coach scared, because that is really disrespectful to say, and it's not what I mean. But I'm trying to think of a word to properly use. In some of the games, like Navy, I felt this way. In November, I really felt this way a lot. I felt this way
just
against
like
USC.
conservative or
Passive, almost
yeah,
like they were. Again, I don't know what word to use other than afraid or scared, but I don't really mean them that way, because I feel like using fear is to describe a football coach or player is like one of the worst insults you can give. And I don't mean it that way. I'm just not quite sure what better. I think passive might be the best word to use, where it just let's not get burned. Let's not get burned. Yeah. Passive, I think, is probably the way I'll go with it, Ryan. And we didn't see that all the time, but we did see that then. And it's not hesitant, because it wasn't hesitating then going. It was sitting back. It wasn't really turning it up. And so then what was happening is, when the danger of dropping 7 or dropping 8 in the coverage is, if your front doesn't get there and you're dropping guys in the coverage, you got a mobile quarterback. And once he gets to that first line, there's all this open space, which is exactly what we saw Caleb Williams take advantage of. And instead of saying, hey, look, if we're going to go down, we're going to go down doing what we do, and we're going to go down playing our game. And if you're better than us, more power to you.
Sure.
And I don't think this situation is. So I want to see him come out and let these kids attack, have some fun, let these kids attack and get after it. And I think that also will help the linebackers a ton, because just on the whole, we won't need to spend a lot more time on it, Ryan, because we've harped on it all year. But outside of a couple game stretch in November, the linebacker play this year just wasn't good. I think J.D. Bertrand was better than a lot of Notre Dame fans give him credit for. But I still don't think he was as good as he should have been, nearly as good as he should have been. Part of it was his own fault with the targetings, right? I mean,
sure.
You basically missed a full game because of targeting. But the other two linebacker spots were up and down, and at times just not being used. I thought Jack Kaiser had some moments where he was really good this year. And then other times when you're like, boy, he's just not able to run, with those guys because of his lack of length. Or he's able to run, but he can't hang with those guys because his lack of length. And then at times, like, he just looked like he wasn't sure on committing to a route, and he got behind. Just was up and down. Like some weeks Navy game, I thought he was great. Was it BC? There was another game in November. I thought Jack was really good. I think it was BC game. I thought Jack was really good. And then the USC game, you're like, oh gosh, this is not good. And then Maris was just.
He had 2 good football games in a row, and then just before and after just was not good. I mean, it's just,
it was bad. I mean, it's hard to justify or explain why other guys did get more snaps there. And we try not to be the whole, well, when something's not working, just play the next guy. This is what we push back on when we come to the offensive line early. Oh, just bench Josh Lugg and bench this guy and bench Zeke Correll. And it's like, no, that's not the answer. Just let this line come together and let's let it play out a little bit. And then eventually, pretty quickly, by the end of September, the line was playing really well. But sometimes when something goes on for basically a whole season, you're like, those couple good games were the anomaly now.
Right.
Not the rule. And so I just don't see how you can justify not giving some of those kids more time.
Yeah.
Will they do it or not? I don't know. But I mean, I hope that Maris comes out and plays a great game because he's talented. I mean, he's athletic. I'm starting to use that word more than talent. But at this point in time, I don't see how Prince Kollie doesn't play more in this bowl game, Ryan. And that right there, that decision right there is going to tell me a lot about whether or not they're willing to really make some of the harder decisions about this is, will we see more Jalen Sneed, a linebacker, or are they just going to use him, put him on the edge and let him rush the quarterback? Mm-hmm. Will we see Prince Colley get a chance to play more linebacker? Because the thing that troubles me is some of the things I've heard about what they're doing bowl prep wise. It's like all the linebackers that could potentially compete with JD and Marist are moving to Viper. You know what I mean? It's like, why?
Right.
You know what I mean? How many freaking Vipers do you need? Right. And so if I don't see Prince Colley in this game, if I don't see Jalen Sneed or in this game in some capacity, if I don't see Nolan Ziegler, at least in some capacity in this game, then I'm going to say, okay, nothing's changed. It's still about the scheme. And the only reason the veterans are playing is because they know the scheme better than the younger kids. It's the only justification for not playing those guys right now, Ryan.
Yeah.
You got to see what Prince can do. I mean, because you know what Marist is now. He's a senior. He was the same guy this year that he was in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Athletic, rangy, incredibly undisciplined, often didn't look like he knew how to react to what was happening.
Yep.
Am I missing something?
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And especially with how Notre Dame's recruited linebacker over the last couple of years, right? I mean, you talked about Prince Colley. You talked about Jalen Sneed, excuse me. You talked about Nolan Ziegler. Junior Tuihalamaka, we know, is playing a little bit more Viper right now than off ball these days. But then coming in next year as well, I mean, you're going to have Drake Bowen coming to campus. You're going to have Preston Zinter. Linebacker talent is not going to be an issue at Notre Dame, and it's not an issue now, right? It's not.
What does that mean, Ryan? When you say linebacker talent's not an issue, are you basically saying it's not an excuse to not play other guys? You can't say, well, we got to play Marist because the talent difference so great.
There's two excuses that can't happen right now. One, you can't look, JD had some really nice moments last year. We were fully on, like in the preseason, you heard me many times say he was good last year. There were a couple games where he wasn't as good, right? But he played really well considering that he was kind of just pressed into duties that would have been Marist Loifau's going into the year. JD played well. You have no excuse to not get more out of JD Bertrand, Marist Loifau, and Jack Kaiser this year. That's starting group for one. You don't have excuses there because Jack played better last year. JD played better last year. They did. And then you also don't have excuses if that's not working and it's not coach driven. Maybe a couple of players just did not take a step forward. Then you have no excuses not to get the better athletes on the field if that's what you perceive them to be. Like we know how athletic Jalen Sneed is. We've only seen it very sparingly this year, but even going back to the recruiting days, you know how special of an athlete he is. You know Nolan Ziegler is a really impressive athlete as well. You know Prince Colley, who was Mr. Football in the state of Tennessee, was the Buckus Award winner for best linebacker in America coming out of high school. You know how talented that kid is. So if your linebackers aren't getting it done because they haven't taken a step forward, there's no excuse not to get some of the younger, potentially more talented players on the field. Like there's no excuses. So one, you have no excuse for not getting more out of your starting unit for one. And two, you don't have any excuses not to replace them if they're not playing well. You don't.
Right.
There's something that isn't right in that linebacker room right now. There isn't.
Right. Now, that's also going to tell us how the linebacker rotation is handled in the bowl game is going to tell us a lot about what Al Golden views as the problem. And to me, I want to see a twofold thing. I want to see the younger players playing more while also limiting the scope of what you're doing. If we see him simply replace the veterans with younger players, but still do what he's doing, he's basically saying, I wasn't the problem. My scheme, the fact that my entire position group underperformed this year, it's not my fault. It's them. I'm going to replace them with younger guys. Or he's going to play the veterans and say they didn't play well. Well, really, there's four options. Option number two is so the first one's not good. It's not good. Don't just blame the players, put new guys in and keep doing the same thing that you've been doing. Second big concern is he says, well, I got to make it, we've got to keep doing what we're doing. The kids will figure it out, like I said earlier. And then he still plays the older guys because the younger guys still don't have the full grasp that he needs to make all the adjustments. Right. So it's just more of the same. Option number three is better, but still not ideal. And that is, look, these kids underperformed and it was my fault. I'm not going to throw them under the bus because I didn't do a good enough job. So we're going to limit things. We're going to give these kids a chance in the bowl game to go out and perform in a system that is more geared towards what they do well, and then let them go play and then see how they do. I don't love that idea, but I would understand that idea and be somewhat okay. At least he recognizes it. And then the fourth thing is, to me, the ideal, which is that is true that they didn't necessarily play well, and part of it is your fault. But with Marist, it's a little different. With Jack, when I thought Jack struggled, it's like there was some uncertainty of what he was supposed to do, or he just got in bad matchups. He's barely 6 feet tall, and he'd go against taller, faster guys. With Marist, it was like, I don't know what he's doing right now. Like, there were literally times this year, Ryan, where we were like, I don't know, like, what he was supposed to do. He was so out of position and doing something so completely different than everyone else. I can't possibly fathom what he was supposed to do. I never had that complaint with Jack. With Jack, it was he took a bad angle. He was late reacting. He was uncertain, but he ended up where he was supposed to be. He would just get there late. And when you get there late as a linebacker, that's the difference between a 4-yard tackle for a 4-yard gain and a 40-yard touchdown, right? I mean, hey, I knew what I was supposed to do. I just reacted slowly because I wasn't sure. And where Maris is like, where's he going? Why is he running the opposite direction of everybody else?
He's covering like hook to curl on an inside zone.
Yeah. And so those are things where, like, I don't know if I can buy the coaching being the problem for Marist.
Right.
I think you could use that as a justification for why JD wasn't as good and why Jack struggled at times. I don't think you can use it as for Marist. So to me, if you want to still play Jack and JD and then get Prince Collie queued up and say we're gonna scale back things a little bit, let these kids play because these kids can run a little bit, then that's kind of the ideal for me. I would still like to say I still want to see Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler get a shot to get some rover snaps.
Sure.
Because as much as I like Jack, he's a limited player when you start talking about matching up against the Bamas, the Georgias, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, not the Clemsons, the USCs, the Ohio States of the world. He did. We saw that against North Carolina. That was the one position on defense that kind of struggled all game, was Jack trying to cover a spread offense. He just couldn't do it. He was always a step behind. So that's the ideal, Ryan, but there's kind of a wide spectrum there, and I don't know what we're going to see, but what we need to see is that last part. I'm not saying bench JD, bench Jack, bench Maris, all of them, sit them, don't play them. Not saying that. They have earned the right to play, but I think Prince Collie has as well. Prince needs to play a bunch. I want to see a little bit of Jalen and a little bit of Nolan. Let them play, and if they're playing well, go ride them a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to see Junior Talamak at Mike. The biggest concern I had is why they moved him to Viper fully for the bowl game, because he was playing both during the season. That concerns me a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, so you're just dead set JD is going to face no competition of Mike. Is that really what you're going to say? I don't know if that's a precedent you want to set as a football coach.
Yeah.
You know, because you're not. It's not like JD played great. He didn't play bad, and he gets a bad rap from Notre Dame fans on. They think he was bad. He wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. He wasn't so good that you're like, well, no one's going to challenge him for that spot. That concerned me a little bit, because who's pushing for that job? Is it going to be Nolan? Is it going to be Jalen? You know what I mean?
It's just a general thing too, Brian. It's like, what if, God forbid, JD Bertrand gets hurt or something during the game? Like, who's your Mike? The guy that you've been playing at Viper all bowl practice? Like, it doesn't. It's just, it's a little puzzling, man. It's a little puzzling because, again, I understand that with younger players, there's going to be some mistakes, right? Like, we understand that. That's the maturation of playing the position. But as well as I do, you can have as many practice reps in the world, but until you have those live bullets, those live reps, game moves a lot faster, man. Yeah. It's a different animal. And again, we've talked about that 4-man linebacker class, which obviously includes Joshua Burnham, who's now playing Viper. At the beginning of the year, coming into the year, we're like, that foursome's probably going to be tough to keep off the field, right? And now we're sitting here in December getting ready for a bowl game where they barely played this year. Jalen Sneed just started playing a couple games ago and has been playing just a little bit. Junior Talamak played a little bit early in the year, but now it's playing, it's got to be regulated to a back of Viper. Haven't seen Nolan Ziegler. Haven't seen Joshua Burnham now at the Viper position. for a position that has struggled this year, why haven't there been a changeup to it, right?
Mhm.
Why not throw a player in there for a few reps in a game and say, you know what, he might not be ready yet, but let's see, right? Because sometimes that light bulb turns on in a football game. It does. I'll tell you this. The first time that I really thought I could play at a decent level wasn't during a practice. Who cares about a practice? It was on a
Right.
Friday night, like seeing the lights and being able to move around and know that you belong there. That's so I am very frustrated. I'll be completely honest about it. Like I was excited about that 4-man class coming into the year before Burnham had moved, from Will to Viper. And I'm very confused on why we haven't seen more of that group this year
And why
because there
they're all
has
getting moved to
been
Viper.
exactly. And there's been extreme inconsistencies at linebacker, and yet you haven't played much of the 4-man class that was the best linebacker group in the country, right? I mean, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't fathom it. Can't understand it.
And so what are we going to see in the bowl game, Ryan? Is it going to be different or not? That's kind of the question, right? That's the thing that we need to see is whether or not that'll be different. And that's one thing I'm curious about. I think one thing that you can say is I do expect the secondary to play well. I think obviously Ben Morrison was good. You're going to get Tariq Bracy back for this bowl game. Jaden Mickey gets a whole month to kind of get over some of the way he played. I think that was a great learning experience. Look, I think Jaden Mickey's an incredibly talented player. Incredibly confident player. He's got talent. He needed some humble pie though, and not so much that I want his confidence to take a step back, but more so for him to understand you could get away with just being really talented in high school. You've got to be a technician in college.
Yes.
And I think Jaden had to learn that. And that's a good lesson to learn. Young guys sometimes need to have some of those failures. It's not a coincidence that Ben Morrison's great finish came right after the game where he got picked on the most against Syracuse.
Yep.
Because he had to learn, okay, I got to learn from my mistake and then go out and get better. So I think Jaden's going to respond very well to the way he played this year. I think the bowl game's going to be a first crack at that, say, hey, look, you've got confidence, you've got ability. That's why we keep putting you out there. Why do they keep putting him out there? Because they know how talented he is. Right. But it's just, and if you watch Jaden play over the course of the entire game, he does some good things. It's just when he makes mistakes, they're big.
Yes.
And so it's obvious and exposed. And you're like, dude, you can't make those mistakes as a corner because that's what happens. So how does he learn from it? How does he bounce back from it? I want to see that. I want to see that. I want to see how Tariq does. I want to see, how they're going to use Clarence Lewis and inside out type of role. So I think the secondary is going to do fine. I think the secondary is going to play well. It's a good matchup for him. There's some good talent on the other side of the ball. Not everyone in part of the South Carolina offense is going to be playing. Raheem Bell's not going to be playing. Austin Stogner's not going to be playing at tight end. I don't believe Josh Vann is going to play. I believe the rest of their corners or receivers are set to play, right? I mean, are there any other receivers that have opted out? I don't think Antoine Wells has opted out, has he?
I haven't seen that. Again, to your point, Van is injured and the Jaheim Bell is obviously transferred to Florida State and Stogner's transferring back to Oklahoma. So those are the only three that I know of.
And then their running back, Marshawn Lloyd is, he's transferring out, so he won't be playing in the game. But I believe Antoine Wells will be playing. I have not seen him opting out. I don't believe.
He's a good football player too. So
he is. They've got some good weapons left. Jalen Brooks is a good football player. He's going to get a chance to play. And there's some younger guys that played that are good players. They were just buried behind other good players. So there's weapons on the perimeter for South Carolina. The secondary's going to have to be on top of their game. So it's going to be a good test for them, but I think they'll play well. It's going to be about, do they turn the front seven loose? Because the one thing about this game, Ryan, is Notre Dame's rush defense this year was weird. I mean, it was weird. There were times when it was really, really good. They went through a stretch from the September 24th to Boston College against in November, where they only allowed in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games, they only allowed. And really, if you look at the Cal game, so really in September 17th, so a stretch of nine games against 8 non-option opponents, they allowed 112, 66, 164, 97, 146. Half of that came on one run, 61, 90, and 56. And then they come out, and that's bookended by a terrible game against Marshall, which followed a terrible second half of run defense against Ohio State and ended with pretty bad run defense against USC. Like, there was no happy medium with the rush defense.
No.
And that's going to be a concern in this game, Ryan, is you cannot allow South Carolina to run the football in this game for two reasons. Number one, they're not good at it. So it's a really bad sign if they're running the football. They only averaged 123 yards all season. At one point in time, Jaheim Bell was their starting running back, basically, because Marshawn Lloyd was hurt. So Marshawn Lloyd rushed for 573 yards this year and averaged 5.2 yards per carry. 9 touchdowns in 9 games, 573 yards. He's gone. Their number 2 leading rusher was Jaheim Bell, who's a tight end, who ran for 261 yards, averaged 3.6 yards per carry. Their next top running back is Juju McDowell, who rushed for 191 yards. And then they have Christian Beal-Smith, who transferred from Wake Forest this season. He's okay. You know, he's had 700 yards in the past, 600 yards in the past. He's okay. There's a reason he transferred to South Carolina and didn't do anything as opposed to staying at Wake Forest. So point is, they're not very good running the football.
No.
And you've got to make them one-dimensional. So this is going to – and we'll talk more about this when we get specific. So what I want to see is a run defense that's aggressive, which then leads to, if you're running through gaps and they pass, and you run through the lane to the quarterback.
Sure.
I don't want to see a sit-back, occupy type of scheme. I want to see an aggressive get after the quarterback scheme, which I kind of thought we saw against BC. You know, we've seen at times. I thought they were aggressive at times this year when he turned these kids loose, they were really good. That's when we saw stretches of really good football. But the run defense was really puzzling to me. And this is a team that's not good at running the football.
They're not.
So,
and the other thing too, Brian, is I agree. I think the secondary is going to do well in this football game, but when Spencer Rattler is protected, he can tear you apart a little bit, man.
Yeah.
Like he's a talented thrower of the football. It's just, we talked about the 7 of his 11 interceptions have literally come against pressure, right? Like that's where it all falls apart for Spencer Rattler. Right. So not only in the run game, being able to, get that penetration and to be able to slow it down early on in reps, but to also get after that kid. Because again, you saw it against Tennessee, right? Where if you're not pressuring a kid like the Spencer Rattler, he can have that one abnormal game where he just tears you apart and you just can't seem to stop him, because there was a reason why he was highly coveted at one point, why he did have a reputation, why there was people that were excited about it.
Put up some pretty good numbers in his first year as a starter at Oklahoma. Not great, but pretty good numbers. Yeah,
pretty good for a redshirt freshman. Like it was pretty good stuff. And we've seen when he's right and when he's not under duress, he has his moments. It's just we know that when he does get duress, he does not have any moments. That's just where it comes down to.
Here, to back up your point, when he was kept clean, Spencer Rattler completed 78.4% of his passes, 9.0 yards per attempt, 11 touchdowns, 4 picks. Compare that to CJ Stroud, who completed 71.2% of his passes, 10.2 yards per attempt, and then Caleb Williams, who completed 71% of his passes for 9.2 yards per attempt. Now, those guys turned the ball over less and had more touchdowns, but they also threw the ball a lot more, right, than him. So he had 283 dropbacks. CJ Stroud was 299. Bad league. Caleb Williams had 337. So they dropped back a little bit more. Different systems, different players around them. I like the receivers at South Carolina. They're not as good as the kids at Ohio State. Not as good as the kids at USC. I mean, there's a lot of other factors, but the completion percentage and the yards per attempt is the numbers I look at. They're very comparable with CJ Williams and CJ Stroud. And then I'm going to pull up Drake Mays here real quick as well, just to add him into the conversation. Since again, we are talking about the top quarterbacks that Notre Dame has faced this year. Drake May was 76.2% completions, 9.3 yards per attempt. So his completion percentage was better than all of them. And his yards per attempt was right there with most of them. Yep. So yes, he can pick you apart. Now he doesn't throw the deep ball a ton. At least he didn't for much of the year, but when he did, he was over 50% throwing outside, right and left. So he's gonna take some shots. They took, looking at this here, they took 50 deep shots this year, right? Yeah. And so when he's pressured, he gets those balls out. It's really pretty. But it's going to be a lot of short intermediate stuff is kind of what they do, which then is kind of their way of protecting against not having a running game, right? And so if he's rattled, he will miss some of those throws as well, Ryan. He will throw one into the dirt. He will sail one into the sidelines if you are hitting him consistently.
Yep.
And so that factors into it as well. So basically, I just want to see Al Golden say, we're going to attack this dude. We're going to attack this offense. We're going to turn our kids loose. We're going to play our younger guys. If that means I can't put as much volume in, fine. You know, you're playing a team without their starting tailback, their top two tight ends, and one of their top three receivers aren't playing. Okay. If you don't have enough faith in your kids to go out there and attack, then what are we doing here?
Right.
You know,
exactly.
Well, you know, we got to recruit better players. Well, you just recruited the best linebacker class in the country. Then if you think you need better players, then play them. Right. Play them. Right. So, I mean, there's no excuses for it. So, turn the kids loose, because that's really the key on defense, Ryan, is, you know, we could get into specifics of it, and we will as we get closer to the game, get specific matchups, but this is going to tell me a lot bigger picture about what Al Golden believes was the reason the defense did not maximize its potential this season, or if he actually thinks they did, because some coaches convinced themselves of this. Notre Dame had a head coach of this for 12 years. Now, whenever things went wrong, it was never him. Right. It was the talent. It was the players. Is Al Golden that way, or is he a guy that has enough self-reflection to say, you know, I did some – because here's what a good coach should do. You know what? We did some really good things this year. We're going to build on those good things this year.
Yes.
But we weren't good enough over here.
Yes.
And this is what I need to do to fix it.
No doubt.
Right? Now, sometimes it is legitimate to say, we're not good enough there. Notre Dame's not good enough a quarterback right now to be a championship caliber football team. They're not. It's okay to say that, and it's not negative to the kids. I love Drew Pine. But what did we say about Drew Pine before the year? He's the kind of kid that'll get you to 10-2, but he's not going to beat the best teams on your schedule with any kind of consistency.
Yep. Right.
And what did Drew Pine do as a starter this year? It was 8-2. You know, I mean, that's who he is. But that's not the standard at Notre Dame. The standard is to compete for and win championships. And defensively, we can say they did a lot of good things this year. They were the reason, we said it at the beginning of the show, they were the reason Notre Dame won some of the games they won. They also did step up and make plays in some of the games they lost. They did a lot of good things against Stanford, but the offense gave you the lead back early in the fourth quarter, and you allowed Stanford to go right down the field and get a field goal to get the lead back. That's on you.
Yep.
That's not on them, right? Your offense turns the ball over. It's not your fault, but you let USC go right down the field and score easily. That's on you. It's not on them. It's on you. And there was too many times like that this year. You know, where like you got to really step up. And in past years, they would step up in those moments. And this year they didn't. He's got to be able to look at that and say, okay, here's what we do. Some really good stuff here. There's some really good players here. What do I got to do to make sure we're getting the most out of them? And what did I do during the season that prevented that? And what are the things I did during the season that allowed that when we did to have success? And that's what I like about bowl games, Ryan, because it allows you to take a step back, do a lot more self-scouting than you can on a normal work week, because it's hard to self-scout during the season. It is. It's hard to self-scout because by Sunday you're watching the film. By Sunday night, you're implementing your game plan for next week. It's hard to find that window to do real self-scouting. That's why bye weeks are great for that, but that's why bowl games are great for that too. And that's what I want to see from the defense in this game, right?
Yeah, it's going to be, again, I think a lot of evidence on growth in this game is what I'm going to be looking at. So we talked a lot about Al Golden. I want to see some adjustments made. I want to see guys let loose. And I honestly, Brian, I've been so excited about some of these younger players that we hear about, right? The Jalen Sneeds of the world, the Nolan Zieglers, the Junior Tuilamakas, the Joshua Burnhams, the Tyson Fords, the Aiden Gobiras. There's a lot of guys that we hear a lot about, but I haven't seen it, right? I want to see what they have there, you know? Like, I just want to be able to see what they have to work with, because that whole, you know, oh, you don't have the guys in the room. That stuff is void when you have guys like Prince Colley and Jalen Sneed in that room, right? Like, that's not an excuse. There's no excuse. So I want to see some guys excited to play football, for one.
Tyson Ford's another one.
Yes.
By the way.
Yep. Tyson Ford. I want to see some of those guys be able to have an opportunity to see what they have, to see what they've been working on, to see what growth they've had, and for his own personal growth as a play caller. All those things I think is presenting a big opportunity in this football game for the defensive side of the football, because I think there is a underselling of how much talent is in that room sometimes. Because yes, it played well in a lot of stretches of the season, but there's still a step up that needs to take, a massive one that it could still take. Because I think it's a very talented room. Yeah. And I think that they have an opportunity against an SEC team that has some speed in certain spots, that has a quarterback that can do damage if he's given, if he's protected correctly. You have a challenge in front of you. And that's why I think that it's a great opportunity for Al Golden to show that he has his personal growth, along with the growth of the players aside from him, obviously, as well.
Right. So we'll see how it plays out, Ryan. That's going to be kind of what we want to see from those guys, and that's going to wrap up this portion of the show. We're going to do a mailbag next because we do have some questions in the mailbag. But it is going to be interesting. And, to wrap up your last point, Ryan, is you can't say entirely that, well, it's just the talent's not there, or we got to do a better job recruiting, because you just landed one of your best defensive classes in years. Guys that you as a staff personally identified as guys they want, right? When Marcus Freeman came on, Tyson Ford became an immediate priority. Aiden Goldbeyer became an immediate priority. Junior Tuihalamaka became an immediate priority. Jaden Mickey, Jalen Sneed, all those guys became immediate priorities. These are the guys that you wanted. You were the one that went and convinced, Josh Burnham to not go to Michigan and come to Notre Dame, right? So these were your handpicked guys. The only commits, Benjamin Morrison's another, the only commits that they inherited, I believe, was Nolan Ziegler and Donovan Heinisch were really the only ones that were more by coaches and weren't here. And we've heard really good things about Donovan Heinisch. He's just probably a year away, like not this year, but like next year, maybe competing, just because he's got to add some size and some strength. But I've heard a lot of good things about what he's done on the scout team. So like, these are the dudes you recruited. These are not guys you inherited. These are guys you recruited. So you can't say, what are you going to say? Hey, Marcus, you did a bad job giving me players, man. No, you got to say, look, if the system we're playing is too complex to get clearly the most athletic guys we have on the field, or on the roster on the field, then they're not the problem. Your system is. That's the life of college football. Here's the reality of it, Ryan. In this era of transfer portal and NIL, if you can't get younger players in the field, you're not doing it right, especially at Notre Dame, where they are going to try to really force that we're going to be a developmental program, not the way that Brian Kelly meant it, where kids need 3, 4, 5 years, but meaning you're going to be a recruit kids, develop them, go play. You've got to be able to find a way to speed up the developmental process on both sides of the ball. You can't have years where your stud top 50 player receiver, Tobias Merriweather, comes in and catches one ball. Right? You can't have situations where Jalen Sneed can't be on the field. You've got to find ways to get that kid on the field. You've got to find ways to get Josh Burnham on the field some way, somehow. Now, maybe you could justify Josh Burnham because he was making a position switch, and my understanding is Josh was okay redshirting because of the position switch. So there are circumstances like that. But I know for a fact Jalen Sneed wasn't happy about not playing, right? And yes, you got Benjamin Morrison on the field, and you got Jaden Mickey on the field. So you showed that you can do it, but you've got to do more of it. And you've got to make sure that your scheme is tailored to where you can get younger players in the field and not to keep them happy, but because you're recruiting dudes, getting them on the field and being willing to say, hey, I can live with Jalen Sneed making a couple mistakes every game because I also know he's going to make some plays.
Right.
You have to learn to live with that. And what can you do to protect against some of those mistakes? Right? You have to do that in college. You have to find more ways to get your younger players in the field, meaning first 1 and 2 year players. And at some positions, they're doing it. Running back, corner, right? Positions where I feel like they have big time position. Dylan McCullough is excellent. He's an excellent coach. Those sophomore running backs did not play like sophomores most of the year. They played like vets, right? Jadarian Price had a great spring I was told by sources at Notre Dame that he was their best back in the spring. Not Logan Diggs, not Aldrich Estime, not Chris Tyree. It was Jadarian Price before the injury. Great coach. Why were the freshman corners able to get ready to play? Great coach. And one of the best in the business, in my opinion. Linebacker, not so much. D-line, questionable right now. right? And so those are the things that we need to see, Ryan, is, Harry Hiestand takes 2 true sophomores and turns them into, one's a bona fide, legitimate All-American, first or second team with everybody. The other one at times played like an All-American, certainly a freshman All-American caliber player.
Yep.
Why? Great coach. So either Marcus needs to hire better coaches at some of those positions, or B, those guys need to understand that the game has changed. The game has changed. The portal and NIL is here. Now, I want to see changes to the system, but they're not until those changes come. You have to live with the reality, not what you wish it would be, but what it is. And that reality is Notre Dame is not going to be in a position to go out there and load up on transfers. They're not. That means their young players are their transfers. The freshman class is their transfer portal, so to speak.
Right.
So you've got to make sure you have a system that's geared towards making sure those guys can come in and play right away. Not always the starters. 11 freshman starters on defense, but they've got to be able to play. You've got to be able to have a system where Peyton Bowen can step on the field as a starter as a freshman, where Benjamin Morrison can step on the field as a starter as a freshman, but also one where Jalen Sneed can do it. Jaden Osbury can do it. Drake Bowen can do it, right? That's going to be the key. And right now, I don't know if they have that system when it comes to front 7 players. They have it in the secondary because they're not a real complex team defensively coverage-wise. They do a lot of things with looks and disguising looks, Ryan, but they don't run a lot of different coverages. They just say, hey, Benjamin, go be a dude. And guess what, Ryan? He was a dude. Maybe apply that at some other positions. And that's my point. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, I mean it's all very fair. We've seen some contributions, and I also think, Brian, that you've seen the best teams in college football over the last few years. You think of the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Clemsons, like those teams. They're also not afraid to play freshmen, right? We've talked about that a ton. I mean, yeah, they're dudes, obviously, but Jerry Jeudy comes in, and Jerry Judy's too good not to play. Even Christian Harris, who was not nearly as good as that type of player. But Christian Harris played early on in his Alabama career because he was too good not to play for Alabama. Georgia, we've seen it, like Akili Ringo's a redshirt freshman, but you see this year a Malachi Starks comes in, and the Malachi Starks is just too good not to play. Like, that's just the point blank period to it. So the best coaches, I believe, yes, sure, understand the system, be a part of the machine, all that stuff. I get it. Trust me, I get it. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to recognize, identify talent, and say, you know what? He might not be able to do X, Y, and Z right now, but he can do A, B, and C, and I can ask them to do that stuff, and I can accentuate those strengths. That's all I want from this program, to be able to understand what a player does well, and even if it's in a simplified, very niche role early on, to be able to use them in that type of role. So I think that you have the players where you can simplify and give them a role early on. And if we're in game 13 now and it hasn't happened, and it doesn't happen against South Carolina, I am going to have some doubts because there's talent on this team that is just being underutilized right now.
Agree. Ryan, that was good conversation. I enjoyed that very much. So we're gonna dive into mailbag here in a second. Let's get those questions going. There's a lot of great conversation during the show, during the chat, but not a ton of questions. So go ahead and get those questions in. Or if you don't have a lot of questions, that's cool. Maybe we answered it all during the show. Before we get to the mailbag, everybody, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message boards, the boards at irishbreakdown.com. I'm going to put something up on the board later today that's just going to, Ryan and I are going to talk, and we're just going to compare notes and all the intel we've had and just kind of say, okay, week from signing day, here's everything we know, and here's where everything stands, and just here's what's BS, here's what's legit, and here's the scoop that we have heading into signing day. So we'll have that up here on the message board. That's for premium members only. So that's boards at irishbreakdown.com. If you haven't signed up yet, you're missing out. You really are. So just thinking about kind of how we've grown over the last year, we added over 2,000 subscribers from where we were a year ago at this particular time. So I was just thinking about that because I was like, where we were last December when Kelly left and when Freeman was hired is like the site just kind of really took off. We almost doubled our memberships on our subscribers on YouTube. We've gone from a little over 600 to over 2,600. Well, we're actually over 2,800, but there are some PayPal people that will lapse at some point in time. So I don't really count them yet because I need to see that they're going to just how the numbers work. But we're technically right now over 2,000 new members since last December. So it's been great growth. And it's been a lot of fun. Still a lot of good conversation, a lot of scoop, a lot of people panicking right now, which we understand, get it. Can't wait for signing day to be over with, but a lot of intel. So we'll have all of that here coming up here very soon on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And of course, as always, make sure that you're still locked into our main page, which is irishbreakdown.com. So Ryan, let's dive into the mailbag here, and again, so we'll get to some star and some questions here a little bit. But I thought this, I thought there was one comment, and I can't find it, from John Erickson. It was really funny. He's like, I can just see it now. The board after the game say, who thought it was a good idea to play all these young guys against Navy? Like, okay, John, good point. There are exceptions to the rule.
That's funny.
But what's funny, though, is, in seriousness, I thought the young guys are the guys that played the best against Navy. Benjamin Morrison was great against Navy.
Jalen Sneed showed a lot.
Was really good against Navy. The guy that struggled was Marist. As a senior.
It's a good point about Benjamin Morrison, Brian, because he didn't even start in that football game, and then he came in, and you're like, he's good. He's fine. He's getting off blocks. He's making tackles. Like, he's fine.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I thought that was a great comment, John. And I couldn't find it. I should have started, and I didn't start because I was just kind of scrolling through looking for questions. I just got a chuckle and then kept scrolling. I was like, I should have started that and read that to people. So my bad on that. But it was very good, John. Very well done. Very well done. Let's get to some more here. ERO 5.20. It's been said that Tommy Rees was limited on offense due to some positional weaknesses. Do you think Al Golden felt there were weaknesses on defense that he had to protect? You want to take it? I never heard that, Ryan, and I don't think he coached that way. In my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think that it was I don't think he was reserved defensively because he thought there were some limitations, ERO. Like, I don't think that you looked at him and said, like, he's, not blitzing a ton, or he's doing this type of coverage because he just didn't trust what he had at the positions. And because I think Al Golden's a smart guy, obviously, right? Like, he's been coaching a long time. I have great respect for Al Golden. I really do. I mean, I learned a lot from him just watching him at Temple here, right over the bridge for me, right? Like, I learned a lot about football just watching his teams play. And I'll say this, I also think that he's a smart guy, so he's not going to look at a position that you have Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart and a linebacker room, the freshmen that we've talked about, including Prince Kali, and talk about the defensive line of Isaiah Foskey and Jason Malone. Like, I really just find it hard to believe that he looks at that unit and said, I lack talent in certain areas. Is there spots that need to get better? Of course. It's just a natural maturation, right? But I don't think that you saw any evidence based upon how he called a football game this year that you would say that he thought that he had a lack of talent. Because there were times where I thought he was a little over aggressive at times too. Like, it wasn't always like there were a lot of blitzes like in the middle section of the season. I'm just like, why are they blitzing so much?
That's the thing, is they got too aggressive against some of the teams that were underwhelming, and then passive against some of the better teams. And it's like, just be you, right? Like, it was kind of puzzling. It was kind of puzzling. But yeah, Ryan, we agree. I don't think it was a scenario in which he was coaching like he didn't have confidence in the linebackers like he did. And matter of fact, I think you could argue the opposite.
Yeah, because you don't ask him to do so much. And
right. They were asking him to do too much.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he just, this is my scheme. This is what we do. Mm-hmm. And let's get better at it. So like Freeman did that last year, and it didn't start well. They struggled against Florida State. They had some issues, gave up 2 huge plays against Navy, had the blown coverage the blown read on the quarterback run late in the game that gave Toledo the lead. There were mistakes, but you could see it start to click. And when it did click, that last month and a half of the season, they were dominant on defense. Mm-hmm. They didn't play a lot of good teams. They played a lot of good offenses, though. That's the thing. They didn't play a lot of good teams, but play a lot of good offenses and shut them down. Yeah. And when they did play teams that weren't good, they dominated them. Like, they had 3 BCs last year, right? Like, they had the one this year, but they had 3 games like that last year where they just absolutely dominated weaker opponents on defense with their defense. We never saw that light bulb go off. Actually, I thought we did kind of like in that Clemson, Syracuse, the light started to go off. There were still some big mistakes, but we felt coming out of the game like, there were still some things to clean up. But, I actually saw some stuff from this game that I liked. Obviously, Clemson, the defense did great. I thought they played great at linebacker in that game. And then Navy happens, and it's just like, okay, you take the step back. And then, you play great against BC, and then USC is just this giant step back defensively. And so they never just built on that success the way that they did in 2020 and the way they did in 2017. I mean, that's kind of what we saw from Elko's unit too is, they were okay early, but, gave up 16 points in the opener against Temple, gave up 20 to Georgia, 20 to BC. And then after that, it was like 18, 17, 10, 14, 14 against some pretty good football teams. The Wake Forest game wasn't great, and they gave up 41 points in Miami, but let's be honest. If you go back and break that game down, that was not on the defense.
No.
You had like 2 pick sixes. You had another touchdown that was set up. I mean, the defense actually kept them in that game for a while. Played well against Navy, played well against Stanford. It's the offense is the one that shot him in the foot. But you could see when the light went on in Elko's defense. And the same thing with Clark Lee's defense and his defenses. Like you could see at some point in times the light would go on for that team and the defense would start playing better and better and better. So I need to see that from Al Golden's unit. And we didn't see that from Al Golden's unit.
Yep.
But hopefully we will. Brian Hockney with a question. I asked this yesterday if you answered disregard, but what are your thoughts on the 2024 twins, Jacob and Jared Smith from Connecticut? You asked this yesterday. We didn't get to it because Ryan had just talked about it the day before, but there are still some people who maybe didn't see that show. So we'll bring it up again today, Brian. And it's not that I didn't want to answer. It's just we were kind of running low on time, Brian. So I just kind of had to – some things had to kind of go by the wayside, and we just couldn't get to everything. And since we had talked about that day before, I passed it. But he brought it up again, Ryan. So for people who weren't able to listen to the Monday show, just share your thoughts. Obviously, these are the 2024 defensive linemen. They're twins from the state of Connecticut, Jared and Jacob Smith, visited Notre Dame during the season. And also, did they visit during the summer as well?
I think just during the season.
Just during the season? Okay.
Yeah.
So just kind of give your thoughts on them as players and where things stand in their recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, so the coaches obviously were out yesterday to visit the school. They play in the state of Connecticut. And so really interesting pair, honestly, Brian, right? Like Jacob Smith is the longer defensive end, like the true edge rusher. He's a Viper type. He's 6'5", 225 pounds. And the system they run a lot of 3-man stuff. So he actually plays a lot of like 4-eye at times for their defense. But you immediately see when you pop on the film Jacob Smith, that kid is long and he is twitchy, man. So that's the type of kid that you get in a weight room, you blink your eye and he's 245, 250 pounds. And he's that type of bendy edge rusher that Notre Dame needs more of, right? Like that's the guys they need. They need that Viper type that can kind of bend that outside track and win with explosiveness and twitchiness. And that's what Jacob Smith is. Jared Smith, for me, he reminds me a lot of Jason Adamalola, a lot about. Like he's now a 6'3", 6'4", 265-pound defensive lineman that plays a little bit inside and out right now. So they play that 3-man front. You'll see him aligned more on the interior. You'll see them aligned in like a true defensive end spot. I think that he has a frame that he's going to be 6'3" and some change, 285 pounds down the line. He's going to be more of that true 3 technique in a defense. So I think that you have a very interesting pairing because they're very different football players. You have a true Viper in Jacob Smith. Jared Smith is more of an inside-out 3-tech type, which is interesting, obviously, for a pairing. Where they are, like I said, the coaches were out yesterday to visit the school. I've had conversations with both brothers over the last couple of days, with obviously the dead period being lifted. They think very highly of Notre Dame. They do. And we know, just talking to sources, that Notre Dame kind of reciprocates that interest in them. So I think Notre Dame has high opinions of them from everything that we've gathered. I know the twins both really like Notre Dame, and I think they're going to be absolutely in the running. Both of the brothers have kind of been on the standpoint of we're not going to rush this decision as much. It's probably more of a spring-summer decision for kind of coming up. But if it's spring, it's going to be very late spring, but probably more of a summer decision. But I think Notre Dame is in a very good spot with the Smith brothers, and I think that they would bring a lot to a defensive line room, a lot of raw traits, a lot of excitement. I know as a sophomore, that pairing had like They had like almost 60 tackles for loss combined and like 20 sacks. Like they were just ridiculous as sophomores. And then, as you can imagine, they continue to do the same stuff as juniors. So I really like Jacob and Jared Smith, though. I think that they would be an incredible get at Notre Dame if they're able to close on them. And I think that they are in a very good spot with them so far.
Good stuff. Next question. So there you go, Brian. And I know that he wasn't alone in wondering that, with obviously the news about Brandon Davis Swain decommitting this weekend. Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, asked, what young player are you most excited to see play or get time in the bowl game that we haven't been talking a lot about?
Should we do one on each side of the ball? I think that's probably the best way, right? Sure. I mean, we've talked a lot about Jalen Sneed. I'm going to say Joshua Burnham. Burnham's one for me because I just seeing him in person, man. He is really developing physically. I like the profile he has from a length, explosiveness perspective. I don't know how much I'm going to expect him to play in the bowl game, but if he does, I'm going to have my eyes definitely peeled on number 40 to see what he can bring off the edge. On the offensive side of the football, we've seen him, but I'm excited to see Holden Stace in this football game. You know, with Michael Mayer out, he's obviously going to have some opportunities working with Mitchell Evans. So I'm excited to see Holden Stace on the offensive side of the football. I'm excited to see Joshua Burnham if he gets some reps at Viper in this game as well.
Yeah. I think I'm going to kind of cheat. He says that we've talked a lot about Tobias Merriweather, but I want to see him a lot. I do. I want to see him play in this game. He's a young player that I would like to see. The problem on offense is most of their best young players are already playing. You know, I mean, your two left tackles are sophomores. Your top two rushing back, runners and running back are sophomores. Your starting quarterback is going to be either a sophomore or freshman. Deion Colsey's a sophomore. Lorenzo Styles is a sophomore. Jaden Thomas is a sophomore. Mitchell Evans is a sophomore. So Notre Dame is actually, it's kind of funny. Like, have you heard one time this year where Marcus Freeman's really or Tommy Reese have just just harped on the lack of experience that they have as a reason for their struggles, the way that Brian Kelly did last year when they had a fifth-year senior quarterback, a junior running back, a senior wide receiver. You know, I mean, they had a fifth-year senior receiver.
You could have used it a lot more this year than last year.
Yes, a sixth-year senior right guard, a senior center. It was always a BS excuse. This year, you could have actually used that excuse, and they didn't. They would note that they're young, but they never use it as an excuse for not playing. Right. It was always like, look, we're young, so we've got to figure out a way to get these guys to where they need to be. It was always acknowledging the youth, but not use it as an excuse the way it was last year when they weren't actually a young football team.
Yeah.
So, but those you hope that those struggles this year and all the youth is then going to pay off next year. That's the hope.
I think it will. It will.
Defensively, for me, we don't talk a lot. I mean, you mentioned Burnham. Mm-hmm. Tyson Ford is a guy, but Nolan Ziegler's a guy that I wouldn't mind seeing, even if it's on special teams. I'd go with Jalen Sneed as my number one. If you took out the haven't been talking about a lot about, I'd say Jalen Sneed if you took that part out, but we talk about Jalen Sneed all the time. Mm-hmm. The guy that we don't talk a lot about is Nolan Ziegler. Right. Mm-hmm. He is a really long and athletic kid that, was a bit overlooked in the recruiting class because of he had been committed so long. Mm-hmm. But his senior film was really good. And he graded out as a top 150 guy on my board. Jalen Sneed's legit, right? Athleticism, right? We like him. Josh Burnham's a top 100 guy. We talk a lot about those guys. Nolan Ziegler's a wild card for me. Does he play Rover? Can he play Will? Will he fill out enough to be a Mike? But you talk about here's the thing. You put him and Jalen Sneed and Prince Colley on the field. No one's complaining about Notre Dame's length or athleticism anymore. Nobody. And so somebody made this, and I should have started. I didn't, but somebody made a comment too. It's like, you can't really buy the whole, well, you've got to play the veterans because they know the system thing. That worked with Joe Schmidt because Joe Schmidt just wasn't very good after the injury. Joe Schmidt was actually a decent player in 2014. Mm-hmm. But once the injury happened, he just lost a step, and he couldn't afford to lose a step. He was just not good in 2015. And it's not his fault. He was trying his best, but he didn't make a lot of mistakes. He just wasn't good enough to make a lot of plays. Yeah. That's not true of this group. They make a lot of mistakes, which makes it even less like justifiable to not play the younger guys. Hey, let Prince Collie make a mistake, but let him make it 100 miles an hour, because the guy in front of him is not just making mistakes, he's making big mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Like instead of hitting the A,
yeah.
Prince Collie may make a mistake where he hits the A gap instead of the B gap. It's not good.
Mm-hmm.
But Maris is making mistakes where he's not hitting either gap. He's dropping into coverage. Like, it's just weird stuff, right?
On the goal line too. Like, yeah.
So it's just very weird stuff. So you can't use that excuse of, well, at least they know the system. You can't use that, right? And so those guys need to play. Brandon Plensner says, Brian, who besides Josh Burnham or Junior Tuihalamaka has moved to Viper, or is it just those two? So I've been told, but from sources that we've seen, well, I won't say it. I probably shouldn't have said what I said. We'll just see how the game plays out, because I don't want to give away stuff. But yeah, so I shouldn't have said what I said. So just pretend that didn't happen. So I'm definitely not going to double down it.
They moved Tyler Buckner to Viper? Right. Wow, it's crazy.
So anyway, but yeah, it's just let it play out. So I said that in frustration, but let it play out. Ryan, here's one from Keith Wiegand. What about the kicker from USF? Thoughts? So basically that's Spencer Schrader, is the kid who committed to Notre Dame from South Florida, committed to Notre Dame last night. We are expecting this, Ryan. I believe you guys talked about this in your show on Monday, that you did expect him to, Notre Dame was obviously in a great place there. Interesting player, walked on at South Florida, has been their primary field goal kick, or not extra point kicker for 4 years, was only a field goal kicker for the last 3. He did have 3 games where he kicked field goals in 2019. He's been their kickoff guy for 4 years. He has a 22-yard rushing touchdown that he had in 2019 against UConn. He punted once, I think, at one point in time, but went 11 of 13 last year. I think 9 of 13 this year. Strong leg, right? Numbers are pretty good, but hasn't kicked a ton of field goals, but he's been pretty good when he has, Ryan. So why don't you just give people, I know you were studying the film last night. You're like, I can't believe I'm watching kicker film last night, but so what you saw from film, but then also if you could just share with people some of the stuff that's in the article. So Ryan wrote an article at irishbreakdown.com. Check it out, where he talked to, is it Kornblue is the guy's name, right?
Brandon Kornblue,
who is one of he's like the Chris Saylor, JJ, the Cole kicking, like he's on the level with those guys. And he actually is the personal kicking coach for Spencer Schrader. So Ryan talked to him, got some feedback. So Ryan, give what you think of the kid, and then also share some of the feedback that you got from Coach Kornblue as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see moments of really good stuff with Spencer Schrader. I mean, like you said, Brian, I mean, if you look at 2021, you're like 11 out of 13, including a 52-yarder. Like, that's awesome. Last year as a kickoff guy, he had 50 touchbacks on 62 total kicks, right? So you're like, that's a darn good percentage, So like, there's a lot of good stuff. Like, former walk-on, a kid that has apparently been very underrated throughout the process, both as a recruit and then throughout his career. But there's been moments of some really good stuff. There's been some inconsistencies as far as the percentage of the field goals. But I mean, and you hurt my feelings last night because you never said anything back to I gave you a video of him kicking and you never even said anything back to it.
I can't. I just can't, man. I can't. I can't.
Oh, man, I was watching all 22 of kickers last night, and you couldn't even give me a. Wow, that was nice.
Because here's why. Good job for doing your job, Brian. Great job, buddy. Well done. I'm kidding. Here's what I can tell about a kicker: is his approach consistent, and does he have a fast leg? That's the extent of my kicking knowledge, right? So, like, I just try not to. I try not to get into things that I couldn't, I'd rather you talk about it. I'd rather someone who coaches kicking talk about it. I know what I know and I know what I don't know. Now, I haven't always known what I don't know, but that's what being older and wiser teaches sometimes. Like, you don't have to comment on everything, and especially if you don't know anything. So kicking is I know that a guy's good or not because I can see the results. And I can see like the athleticism. I can see, guy has a pretty consistent approach. I can evaluate his approach time and leg speed. And that's it. But I don't know how all that ties together to make a good kicker. You know what I mean? I just see the results.
I also know what I do not know, and I'm not really a kicking guy. So I went to Brandon Kornblue to tell me, hey, I know you work with him. You're gonna be a little biased, but tell me your opinion of Spencer Schrader. Right? Tell me. I don't know anything about him. All I know is the last 3 years he's 75% on field goals. He was 11 out of 13 in 2021. He's been a pretty good kickoff guy for them last year. Tell me about him. So from Brandon's perspective, he said that this is an NFL level kicker from a talent perspective. He has a leg that should give him an opportunity to play at the next level. We'll see, obviously, if that happens. But tremendous fit from everything he told me. Comes from a great family. He's been under-recruited. He's a hard worker, high academic kid. Would be a tremendous fit in Notre Dame, in his opinion. And kind of the whole conversation started is Spencer Schrader, Notre Dame was on his top of his list, apparently pretty early on in this process.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked to Brandon about it, and Brandon knows Brian Mason. So, he reached out and kind of connected those dots, and Brian Mason kind of, I guess, thinks highly of Brandon for the work that he does. And this thing happened very quickly, very, very aggressively. And Notre Dame got it done. But, from all the counts that from people that I trust that know the kicking position much more than I do, kid's talented, right? Mm-hmm. Will it be consistent at Notre Dame? We'll see. But he's 6'2", 180 pounds, strong leg, has had some really good moments in his career. And now he's going to be on a much bigger stage. So it's going to be
He's going to look like a giant. Yes. After Blake Groupie kicking for you. And Blake's a nice kid, and he's got a pretty good leg too. Just wasn't consistent, this year. But he's really little. So Spencer Schrader's going to look like, man, Notre Dame's got like a power forward playing kicker kicking for him this year. The one thing I will say that the one thing that stood out to me statistically was, Ryan, 50 of his 62 kickoffs this year went for touchbacks.
Yes.
I'm personally just I know there's some teams you can maybe pin, but I honestly feel like there's just too much risk. If you really trust your defense, just don't give them a chance to steal yards on a kick return unless the team's just not good at it and you really think you can pin them. But the other part too that I'll say about him is I liked the part that you had said where the kid reached out to Coach Kornblue and expressed interest in Notre Dame.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's so big. That's so big because it just tells you this is a kid that's going to be bought in. He wants to be here. He knows what he's getting into, right? And he's played at Notre Dame. Now, he didn't play in front of a crowd because it was 2020 South Florida and there was no crowd, but he's been here. He played here. He had I think he had a kickoff against Notre Dame. He wasn't their primary kicker at the time or place kicker at the time. Well, and they got shut out, so he didn't really get a chance to do any kicking that year. But, so he's been here before. Mm-hmm. He's kicked on the field, even though it wasn't a game. He's kicked on the field, so he knows what he's getting himself into. I just like when a kicker wants Notre Dame because he knows the stage. I mean, he knows the magnitude of what that would mean. I also like that his career long this year was against Florida. Mm-hmm. So it was it was at the Swamp in a big moment, loud crowd, and all that kind of stuff. So I liked that as well.
Well, one thing I've learned, Brian, is kicking is a very monotonous thing, right? Like it's the same approach, consistent, good swing, all that type of stuff, right? But I think kickers are judged, and we know this, by what you do in the biggest moments, right? Like that's when the game's on the line, when it's a go-ahead field goal, when you have a game-tying field goal, like those types of situations, that's where kickers are judged. So, I mean, I'm hoping for the best for Spencer, obviously, for Notre Dame's sake of everything, and he's going to have a lot of opportunities to have some big kicks, I think, in Notre Dame next year. So we'll see what happens, but seems like a talented kid that will fit very seamlessly as far as from a character perspective. So,
all right, here's another one here from Arrow 5.20. Said, Brian, how would you sell the IB message board to someone considering joining in comparison to other boards that cover Notre Dame if you are familiar, other than better information? Well, you kind of took out the best part. I mean, it's kind of like, what would you say about this person other than that they're, name the best thing about them? And other than that, what are they? I think the better information is kind of a big part of it. I think our information tends to be more reliable. Everybody gets things wrong, but I don't think we don't get things wrong from the standpoint of, boy, that wasn't actually true. It's just things change. Right. We try to share with you what's our opinion and how we're feeling compared to what we're being told and the difference there. I think the engagement is different on the board. Look, everywhere you go, when you have thousands of people and thousands of personalities involved, you're going to get people that aren't necessarily the nicest or, most polite or whatever. But we have a lot of good debate, and it rarely turns into personal attacks. And when the people do turn it into personal attacks, I deal with them. And they either stop or I make them stop by not letting them post anymore. But I've rarely had to do that. And we had some people like that would kind of come and troll and always kind of be negative. And we got rid of them. And the board's been much better since then. And as way less arguments and way less debates. There's times where people will kind of, jump on it, and then, we deal with it. But like we had somebody post last week, Ryan, that says, hey, I'm on all the boards. And I got to be honest, this is the nicest board there is,
I know, I saw that. Yeah.
Because if somebody's getting ganged up on, we don't always see it, but when we see it, we deal with it, right? We handle it. But, I think there's just a level of respect on our board that doesn't always exist at the other places. And we fight hard to make it stay that way. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not strong disagreement or pushback or, dude, you're wrong. I mean, that's okay. That's not a personal attack. A personal attack is, dude, you're an idiot. Right. That's a personal attack. Saying you're wrong is not a personal attack. And there are some people on the board that view me saying or someone else saying you're wrong as a personal attack. But as long as you're not that sensitive, it's a fun place to be. A lot of great conversation. It's also a community more so than just a message board to talk football. We have people that, reach out and say, hey, I'm struggling with something. I got something going on. We had a guy who's been a member of our board who lost everything he had in the hurricane that hit Florida. So he asked if he could put his GoFundMe page on the board, and he did. And several thousand, within 24 hours had added a couple $1,000s to his need. And to the point where he got back on the board and said, hey, our needs have been met. If you're still wanting to give, here's, give to others. That's the kind of community we have. So I think that's the biggest thing for me is, yeah, the information's great and the dialogue is good. And we always drop our intel there, but it's just it's a great community. Not everybody sees eye to eye. There's politically people on the right, politically people on the left, but we keep politics out of it and we focus on the unifying things, which is we all love college football, and more specifically, we all love Notre Dame football. So I think those are the reasons why our board is better. And here's the other one. It's half the price. So I know On3 is doing their like $1 for the first year thing, but after that, it jumps up to, basically $10 a year, right? And it's Rivals and 247, I believe, are both still $9.99 a year or a month, $99.99 for a year. We are $4.99 a month and $49.99 a year, because the reason why is the message board is ours. I own it. Irish Breakdown owns it. It's our thing. We don't split half the revenue with Yahoo or CBS Sports or whoever the investors are at On3. It's ours. So instead of charging what they charge and just making way more profit, but then also making it less affordable for some people, we decided to go with as low of a price as we could afford and trying to keep it that way. And my vow has been, we will not raise the price for at least the first 3 years of the message board. Well, we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. And especially now with the economy the way that it is, we're doing okay. We don't need to up it because the things that are causing prices to soar are not things that go into what we do, right? There's nothing about what we do that's caused the prices to go up. So we're not going to put that burden onto you guys. So because we want to make it affordable for people as well. So that's another reason I think that our board makes it better.
I think the community aspect's the biggest thing, though, for me, Brian. I've never been on another Notre Dame message board, obviously, but I have seen other message boards where, it's kind of just information laden, and then people just post whatever the heck they want, right? And it's just like it gets very aggressive very quickly. Yeah. And I do feel like there's a lot of good conversation on the board, which makes you feel like you're a part of something, which is great.
Right. Because we want it to be that way. That's why we have the IB Nation shirts, right? It's because we want to be a group. We want to be a community of people that have similar passions with all types of different backgrounds. And we have people of different races, people of different sexes, people of different religions. I've had people like, you're not a Catholic? We have people of different political persuasions. We have people from different countries, but there's a unifying thing that we all have, and that is respect for each other. Doesn't mean we always have to agree with each other, and a community where we care about each other. And you'll see people that are always arguing, but when one of those people asks for a prayer request, one of the first people to jump in and say, man, you got it, I got you, is the person you're always arguing with. Yep. And I think those are things, because at the end of the day, this is football, man. We're talking football. This isn't life or death. This isn't all this other stuff. Talk football. Occasionally, as Irish blooded, just saying occasionally talk history, and other stuff. But we don't talk politics, and that's because that's a very divisive thing, and we definitely keep that off the board, whether you agree with me or not. And that's the thing is, I don't let people that agree with me, get away with things either. It's like, dude, stop. We're not talking about that. So anyway, so that's why I think you should join. I think you'll enjoy. I've not had anybody reach out say, funny story. There's a guy that canceled his membership, and the reason why is he found out that I blocked him on Twitter because Twitter doesn't pay me. So I got to the point where I used to argue with people all the time on Twitter and get really aggressive, and I'm like, I don't want to be that guy anymore, and I don't want to get into that anymore, and it's just not worth my time. And people on Twitter I find to be very disrespectful a lot of times because they're hiding behind a fake name and a phone or a keyboard, so they want to act tough, right? I got a point where I was like, if you want to come at me with some personal stuff, then just whatever, I'm gonna block you. So I blocked the guy, and he found out, and he's like, I want to cancel my account because you shouldn't want me on your board because you have me blocked on Twitter. And then he said I can find information elsewhere. About 3 months later, because I says, hey, I actually couldn't find it elsewhere, so I'm back. Please unblock me on Twitter. I did, but it's like, here's someone who left a little frustrated, not because of the board, but because of I blocked him on Twitter, and he thought he could find what we offer out there somewhere else, and he realized he couldn't. And so he came back, and but also got unblocked on Twitter, and I haven't had any issues with him since then. So, he was very respectful in the conversation where he's leaving. He wasn't a jerk. He wasn't disrespectful. It was a great conversation. So yeah, I think those testimonials are my favorite ones, right? Where it's like, I thought I could find something else better out there, but I realized I couldn't. So yeah,
so funny.
Yeah, it's a good one. So anyway, let's get to some more questions here. Irish Blooded says, question about CB Nation and viewership. Do you know if a whole video needs to be watched to count towards monetizing it, or can you just click on it and watch a small bit and click on the next one? So right now with CFB Nation, it's not monetized. So right now, and I'm going to start putting more videos. We haven't put any videos up there in a couple weeks because it's not monetized, and we've been kind of busy, and I'm the only one right now that does any of that. So I'm going to start. I've got a couple videos I'm going to put up today. John Garcia is going to start doing some recruiting stuff leading up to signing day. I'll put those on CFB Nation. But honestly, right now, it's about time. We need watch hours. We have over 1,000. We're up to 1,400 subscribers. We don't have enough watch hours. So in order to get monetized, you have to be, I believe it's 1,000 subscribers and like 4,000 watch hours. We're at like 2.7 watch hours. So basically what we need is people to watch as long of the video as possible. Now, when it gets monetized, if you just watch a couple bits, you get the intro commercial and whatever other commercials, and we get some credit for that. But anytime you're trying to help us out, the longer you watch, the more videos that play, and letting the commercials play all the way through is better. So I think it's like 15. So you need at least like the whole 5-second videos, or at least 15 seconds of the ones that can be skippable or something like that. But I don't put too much into that.
YouTube's weird, man.
Y'all got to do what you got to do, right? So, yeah, that's the thing. Now, as far as if you're doing it on the podcast app, just play it, and just like I don't think they track like who listened to the whole thing or whatever. It's just downloads on the podcast app, and that's monetized. We are actually getting monetization for that. So I appreciate that question very much. Robert Bishop says, I really thought we'd know something about the transfer quarterback by now. A little surprised. I think people need to be patient. Let it play out. There could be, I'm not saying there is, just saying there could be a lot of different reasons why we haven't heard anything. Some kids have bowl games to play and are not planning on jumping the portal just yet. They want to play their bowl games. That could be it. Just saying. So, all I will say is Notre Dame has been very active with portal quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. Some kids were quickly out because they're like, okay, well, what's your offer? The chance to compete for starting job. No. What's your other offer? Okay, good luck wherever you're going, because that's not how we do it. We want you to come here because you want to compete and try to win a championship and maximize your potential draft value. That's the value here. If you're just looking for a handout, this isn't the place for that. And there are quarterbacks like that. So, I would just say be patient, let things play out. Okay. Bowl games start here this next week. Let's just see how things go. I would be shocked if we haven't heard something by a week after the bowl game is over at the latest. So just let it play out. Okay. And that's all I'm going to say on that, because I just want people to just let it play out. We'll have a lot more to say on it at the time. Robert or Irish Blooded says, how do you weigh as a coach this late in the season development attempts versus putting the next guy in? And then he kind of brought up the offensive line thing, right? He says, basically thinking back to the early in the season when so many people wanted changes in the O-line, but it was better option to give the same ones more time.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take a first crack at this, Ryan, and then I'll follow up if I have more?
I think for me, you have a 12-game sample size of what your linebacker room has looked like, for instance, right? So I'm going to use the linebackers as an example. You haven't seen it. You saw a couple games where linebackers as a whole play pretty well, but then you've seen a whole lot of not great otherwise, right? So it hasn't been like exponential development. You haven't seen started off not great, got a little better, and then now you're playing well at the end of the season. It's kind of been didn't play great, played good for a couple of games, then you're back down to where you were to start the season, right? So the player development side just hasn't happened. So there could be several reasons for that. And we talked about it a lot, obviously, early in the podcast, but how I can weigh development attempts versus putting the next guy in is in this football game coming up here. If I see one, Coach Golden maybe take some accountability and say, hey, I wasn't putting these guys in the right position to be as successful as possible. So let's change up a little bit of like what I'm going to ask them to do. You can see that stuff, right? That's could be a schematic approach, but also could just be a philosophical approach as far as what am I going to ask Maris Loifau to do? What am I going to ask JD Bertrand to do? What am I going to ask Prince Khalid? Like whoever the linebacker is in there. You can see that growth. But then also, if you see a coach decide I can't get the most out of that player for X, Y, and Z, and you bring in another player, then you can still see growth from a coaching perspective, because I think it still shows that you can find a role for a player in your defense for a specific reason. But I mean, Brian, for me though, in this game, it's literally what is Coach Golden asking these players to do? What is a coach asking their guys to do? Has it changed what your standpoint is? Because I mean, we've talked about this a ton, right? In a certain role, Maris Loifau could still be a productive player. But we've also seen that when he is not used in the right role, he can be a hindrance to you. So in this game, do you ask him to just do one thing really well, and then you also get some other guys more playing time behind him? Or do you just kind of throw everything out the window and say, we're just going to stick to what we do and it's going to look the same? So I think it's just more of a maturation of asking yourself, what can I do to make that player better? And then you could see those instantly as far as, are you asking him to trigger faster? Are you asking him to do this, X, Y, and Z? Like, I think that there's ways that you can see if a coach has grown, because he'll say, what can that guy do well for me? And I'm going to ask him just to do that. That's the baseline.
I think the other thing too, Ryan, is context. I think all that, I agree with all that. The other thing is context, right? What is the context of a situation? With the offensive line position, it was you literally had three guys playing a brand new position from what they played the year before.
Right.
You had Josh Lugg moving from tackle to guard. You had Zeke Rowe moving from guard to center, and you had Jarrett Patterson moving from center to guard, and he was injured for much of camp. And it was just kind of like, hey, let's give these kids more than 2 games to develop. Now, if we'd have got to midseason and Zeke Rowe was still playing bad, we'd have had a different conversation, right? If Josh Lugg was playing bad, we'd have had a different conversation. If Jarrett Patterson looked like he was injured and just not capable of getting the job done, we'd have had a different conversation. But by allowing them to continue to develop together, and that's another part of it too, is certain positions require a level of cohesiveness. If a cornerback is struggling, dude's just struggling, right? I mean, you can't really put that on anybody else, because it's not struggling when there's a blown coverage and the safety doesn't help out. That's not him struggling. That's the defense struggling. With the offense is if I'm struggling, then that's going to impact the guy next to me. And that's kind of how it goes. So it's kind of like, let these kids get a couple games under their belt. And the light started to kind of go on late second quarter against Cal in game 3. But really in the second half, you started to see, okay, these kids are starting to figure it out. And then North Carolina happened. And then from then on, the offensive line was, for the most part, the rest of the year, really good. And the games they weren't as good, you could point to numbers. Like the only game I thought the offensive line didn't play well was Navy. I didn't think they played well against Navy. They passed pro to okay, but they didn't play well against Navy. I didn't think they played bad against USC. USC just said, you're not running the ball. We're going to put 9, 10 guys near the box. We're going to make you beat us with Drew Pine, and he couldn't do it. 23 of 20, but he couldn't beat them. He couldn't make the plays he needed to make on those drives that resulted in turnovers to get points. You get points out of those 2 drives, it's a different ball game. Even if USC scores right back after you make it 17-14 to make it 24-14, 24-14 looks a whole lot different than 24-7.
Yep.
And then that late drive in the game when it's 37 to 21, instead it's 37 to 28 and you've got the ball, or it's 30 to 21 and you've got the ball as opposed to 30 to 14 or whatever the case may be. Those extra scores matter. And so because you couldn't, it's again, the mistakes that they had in that game were not, the turnovers were not USC making a play. They were unforced errors. And so it's the context of it too, Ryan, is younger players step in on the corner, on the edges, and then you've got some veterans moving around playing new positions. That's why I was a little more patient with J.D. Bertrand early in the year. He's moving to Mike, and I thought he got better. Still not great, but got better. Jack just kind of was who he was all year. Marist kind of was who he was all year. There was no context. He was playing a position he'd been playing his whole career at Notre Dame. There was not the additional context of let's just let him play out to the degree of where you're okay with it towards the end of the year. Early in the year, we defended it. Marist missed last year. Let's give him some time. JD's positioning. But after about middle season, you're like, okay, this is just kind of who they are. Right. And this isn't good. Right. And so that's the difference. And so when you get to late in the season, you have enough of a body of work to be able to say, hey, we've got to get some of these young guys ready to go so that way our depth is better next year and we can have more competition in the spring. Or it's like, this dude's not playing well. We need to give that guy a chance to go seize the job now. Those are the 2 circumstances, but it's based off of the whole body of work, in my opinion. All right, let's get to a few more here before we get out of here. Leighton Burkholder has a question. He says, with the coaches that maybe didn't coach up the freshmen to Freeman standard, is next year their proving year to keep their jobs? I don't know if that's how you should look at it. If you're Marcus Freeman, it's more about we've got to get better. Yes. I don't want to coach in a circumstance where he feels the pressure of if you don't do a better job, you're fired. I mean, he's because he's not going to give you his best. He's going to be trying to protect his job, right? It's, hey, what is the standard here? The standard is a championship. I didn't coach well. I'm Marcus Freeman for this conversation, okay? I didn't do a good enough job getting this coaching staff and this team ready to go. 8-4 is not good enough. Coach Reese, it's not good enough. And Coach Reese needs to be able to see that. Coach Easton, you did some really good things, but, maybe some – and you go along the line, and everybody needs to look in the mirror and be willing to say what I did well and what I didn't do well. And Coach Mickens, who I praise nonstop, hey, did a great job getting Benjamin Morrison ready to play. By the end of the year, Cam Hart was playing at a very high level, but we didn't quite get Jaden Mickey where he needed to be. Tariq was really good. We got a lot out of Clarence Lewis. He was solid this year in that role. But you know what? I need to do a better job getting Jaden Mickey ready to go. I guarantee you Mike Mickens is having that conversation. I remember reaching out to a source close to him after the Syracuse game, trying to understand. He's like, no, that was my fault. Benjamin got beat on that touchdown because of me. I took ownership of it. Not in the past, it would have been, well, kid didn't do what I asked him to do, blah, 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 blah. No, that was on me. I told him this thing, and it was the wrong thing to do, and bam. And then but what happened after that? Jaden Mickey dominated the rest of that game, right? And then, of course, that set him into just playing great football down the stretch. If you know Mike Mickens at all, he's looking in the mirror and saying, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. Benjamin did good. But man, I gotta get Jaden Mickey going. That's what the coaches do. And that's what I want to have those conversations about. If I've got a coach that's kind of arguing with me or justifying the job that just happened after 8-4, I don't know if that guy's the guy that I can win a championship with. Right? Like, I would hope that my criticisms of Tommy Rees are never as sharp as his own criticisms of himself. I would hope that that's true, because the great ones are never satisfied. Yeah, we won a championship, but you know what? We need to be better next year. That's what you want. That's what the great ones do. And that's what I want. That's more for me if I'm Marcus Freeman, is I want to be surrounded by coaches that I don't need to tell them that what they did wasn't good enough. They need to tell me that what they did wasn't good enough. And if a guy wants to battle with me about, is this good enough? Then I don't need to tell him you're coaching for your job. I know that's not a guy I'm going to win with. So I think that's more how I look at it, Ryan, as opposed to, hey, if you don't do a better job coaching these freshmen, you're going to be out of here. Hey, how can we get our program to be the best it can be? This is what we need to do. How can we make adjustments to get that going? And then this is what we're going to do. And if a guy's not good enough to do that, then you just make a change. I don't want to put that burden of, every coach should know if you don't do your job, you're not going to have a job anymore. That's a known in the coaching world. You shouldn't have to. If you have to tell a guy that, you should already fire him. Right? He should already be gone because he's not good enough. Right? He should know that. If he doesn't know that, then it's already time to move on. Forget giving him another year. It's already time to move on.
Yeah. And I also think that every coach is different, right? Like there's different approaches to coaching. And then also there's different, you always talk about context, right? Like there's different context to even some of the position groups that players coach. Like offensive line, for instance, is one that develops at a very much slower rates, right? That's one that you need a couple years of maturation. Defensive line is the same way to a degree. There's other positions like corner, wide receiver, that maybe that transition's a little bit easier. So it's not simply you did bad job this year, you're on job watch, because there are some circumstances that you have to take into consideration and that you have to understand. Not every position develops at the same rate. Not every player develops at the same rate. There's a lot of talented players that we've talked about during the show, but a couple of them may have been a little further along than maybe another player in that regard, right? So I think it's just all about constant evaluation for me, right? Like Marcus Freeman should always be looking at, are these players progressing? If they're not, what's the reason for that? Were they not as far along as we thought they were? Did they have a setback? Is the coaching not as good? Like there's just all this constant. I just think there's always constant understanding of why things are happening, and an evaluation process that always happens. It's not point blank period. It's understanding why things are happening.
Right.
So I just think that context is something to consider.
And are they
making
fixable?
Those decisions? Exactly.
Right. Leighton, really good question, Leighton. Really good question. Seek and Destroy, Brian and Ryan, what letter grade would you give Golden for the overall job he did as the defensive coordinator this season? I say B.
Yeah.
Right? I'd say B.
He
did a solid job.
Minus.
Yeah, solid
B
job.
minus.
Right. And I will say this too. They tended to up until USC, they tended to have their better games against the better teams on the schedule.
That's true.
Right? Until USC. I thought they did pretty well against North Carolina. Didn't finish the way you wanted to. Did pretty good against Ohio State. Didn't finish the way you wanted to.
Sure.
So they were at least emotionally ready in those games. I don't think they always executed. I don't think the game plan was always good, but I thought they did a good job of getting those kids mentally and physically ready to play. Again, he did a good job this year. He just didn't do a great job. And Notre Dame he did a good job. He didn't do a championship level job, right? So that's the standard. It's not like a great or he sucked, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's not the world that we're living in right now. There's a lot of good that came out of this season. He did some good things. It's just good is not the golden standard that Marcus Freeman talks about is not, hey, I did a good job. It's right. Did you do a good enough job for us to go out there and compete for a championship the way that you coach the game? And the reality is they didn't do that. They didn't coach championship football against Northwest or against Marshall. Championship teams, when the offense who has been struggling gives you the lead back in the fourth quarter against a team that finished 3-9, you put them away. You make the stop that allows your offense to go out there and get the game done, right? You can't blame the offense. The offense gave Notre Dame a lead in the fourth quarter against Marshall and Stanford, and the defense gave it back with long drives. Can't blame the offense for that. Now, you can blame the offense. Well, it shouldn't have come down to those drives. Very true. Very true. Right. But as bad as they played, they gave you a lead in the fourth quarter, and you gave it right back. You can't blame the offense for that.
No.
But there was also things where, Clemson game, dominant performance. This is one of the most complete games we've seen from Notre Dame in a long time. Offense, special teams, defense. So he did a good job this year. It's just that's not good enough.
Right.
And that's the point. Right.
Good enough isn't good enough. Right. Exactly. That's exactly. Brian, we always talk about gap closers when we talk about that with recruits and with players, right? But it's also gap closing coaches, right? Like to close that gap. Good does not win championships, right? Great does. Great wins championships. And that's always the standard, right? And Again, I don't think it has to be super hyperbolic. It's like either Al Golden's a great defensive coordinator or he sucks. No, Al Golden's a good defensive coordinator. Can he be great? We'll find out.
And I hope that he can be.
Same.
That he can be, because I think he's a decent guy. I think I've always heard good things about him in the coaching world. Very respected guy. I think there's frustration from the players in regard to the scheme and maybe not spending enough time developing younger players. I think that's a problem, but it was never a thing where I heard he's not a good guy.
Right.
He treats the players poorly. He treats the other. I've never heard anything like that. He's a good guy. He just needs to do a better job coaching. And that's
100%.
that's the deal. As does everyone else on staff. You went 8-4, right? I mean, even Brian Mason, who did a great job this year. There was a couple games you're like, hey, man, you got to get the kicker situation figured out, right? I mean, there's a couple games where you need to get the kick return situation figured out, man. You had a chance to get some returns, and so everybody's got to do a better job. There's some good things this year from some coaches, some really good things. D'La McCullough, really good things. Chancey Stuckey, really good things. Jared Parker, really good things. Mike Mickens, Brian Mason. There's some really good things, but all of them have areas where their units have to be better. All of them.
Yep. And
you would hope that I'm not the person. You would hope that me saying that is not news to them. That's the difference. Right. So,
well, the great ones do that self-evaluation themselves. They don't need anybody to say it at all.
That's right.
So,
Marky Stewart with the super chat. Thank you, Mark, for this. If we don't get Peyton Bowen, I'm out. LOL. Just kidding. You guys had a really good year. Keep up the good work. We appreciate you, Mark. And Mark is also one of the sort of the OGs. Mark's been around from pretty close to the beginning, if not the beginning. So we appreciate you being with us, buddy. And that's the thing is like it's the community aspect of it. It's because I'll be honest with you. This is the first year that I've covered Notre Dame for any kind of website where we didn't see a dip in traffic, memberships, or other engagement when they lost games.
It's wild.
When I've worked at other places, Ryan, and I prepared you guys for this after the first year. I was like, dude, we're going to see a lot of people cancel their subscriptions because that's what happened when I was at the last two places I was at that were membership places. We didn't see that. We actually had net gains after the 0-2 start. And I think the reason why is because people wanted to understand what the heck was happening. And they knew that the one reputation I hope we always have is we are Notre Dame fans. We will defend the coaches when they need to be defended, and we will be critical when there needs to be criticism. It's not personal, usually. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes guys deserve to have some shots taken at them. Not on this staff, but, previous coaches. But as much as I may like a coach or may love Marcus Freeman or respect Harry Heastand or respect, Al Golden and the interactions I had with him when I was a young coach, he was very kind and courteous and respectful to me. And when a lot of Division I coaches didn't treat us that way at coaches' clinics, he was that way. I've always had a lot of respect for him, but he didn't do a great job. Okay. It's okay to say that. Right. I think people are thirsty to know what happened and not get, well, I was praising these guys a week ago and now we're ready to fire them all. That's not real analysis. People want to be told what the heck happened. They want to understand what's going on. And I think that's the reputation we've built. And I hope that we can continue to do that. And if we're not doing that, then it's up to our OGs like Mark to make sure that they hold us accountable. Like you guys are softer on Freeman or harder on Freeman or whatever the case may be compared to how we were. Always want to do that. Okay. Keith Wiegand says, I think you have to give Golden a chance. He has only been with these players for really 9 months. Things don't improve next year, then there's a problem. Keith, so first of all, we're not here saying that Al Golden needs to get fired. We're not even hinting that. Our entire conversation was he needs to do a better job.
Sure.
Because what you just said, Keith, is if things don't improve next year, then there's a problem. So you're admitting that things are not good enough right now, right? So you're basically saying Keith, same thing we are, that this year wasn't a good enough job.
Yeah,
right?
Growth needs to happen.
The difference is we didn't see the improvement that we've seen from past defensive coordinators as the season went on. That's a concern. But we're not advocating for Al Golden to be fired. Because you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to point out this guy's not doing a good enough job. Like Tom Maurice. We need to be able to criticize Tom Maurice and the job he does without it turning into fire him and fire this. Like, come on, guys. Like, let's talk ball here, and not get to. Like, I have a buddy, love him to death, known him for 15 years. But every time something bad happens, who do you blame for that? Like, what are you talking about? Blame? Like, what is this, CNN, Fox News? Like, what are you blaming? Every time something bad happens, you got to blame somebody? Like, dude, here's what happened. I can tell you what happened, and I can tell you, but not everything's about blame, right? It's like, I don't want to be that, right? But he didn't do a good enough job. Did he do a bad job? No, he didn't do a bad job. He did a B.
And
right?
Al Golden's a New Jersey guy too, so I root for him endlessly. All right?
There you go. A B is a solid grade, but that's good enough. That gets you a raise at some places. Mm-hmm. But at Notre Dame, that's not good enough.
100%.
And it's okay to say both of those things can be true. Did a good job, but not a good enough job. I think the phrase you said, Ryan, was great. Good enough is not good enough at a place like Notre Dame.
Nope.
I love it. I love it. Kevon asks, is Junior a permanent move to Viper or short-term added depth piece? I don't know the answer to that, Kevon, to be completely honest with you. I hope it's just a short-term thing. Now, he has been playing some Viper for a while, Ryan. We saw him playing Viper against Syracuse.
Yeah.
That game. So this has been happening for over a month. This isn't new. I don't know if it's permanent or not. I hope not. I hope it's not permanent.
It's a little weird, though, right?
Because
even if you look at the Syracuse game, Brian, like they weren't down injuries at Viper, were they in that game? Like they just made the move because they wanted to make the move, right? I mean, yeah. So I tend to, I don't have any intel on this, so I'm not putting it out like this is the gospel, right? I feel like this might be a permanent move, but I don't know. I don't have any intel on that. It's just I feel like they moved him there, to start even when depth at Viper was good. So I don't know. It wasn't like it was a move out of necessity necessarily, So.
Right. This comment confuses me from Michael Campbell. Michael says, I have pushback on the offense wearing out the defense versus Marshall and Stanford. Even the coach for Stanford was laughing at the Notre Dame offense. Here's my thing, Michael. We can debate the play of the offense in those two games, but if we're going to debate us on what we actually said. We never said that the offense wore those teams out. Literally never said that. The offense did not wear those teams out. What we said is a fact. The offense gave the team a lead in the fourth quarter of both games. That's what we said. Now, we also said that the offense played well in those games. No. Should the offense have played better in those games? We literally said yes. So I get it. You don't like Tommy Rees. I understand. He didn't do a great job this year. No one's arguing that the offense was great this year.
No.
My only point, though, Michael, is you can't deny the fact that in both of those games, the offense scored points that gave the team a lead in the fourth quarter. That's a fact. And in past years, when Marcus Freeman was defensive coordinator, when Clark Lee was defensive coordinator, and when Mike Elko was the defensive coordinator, more often than not, when the defense was given a fourth quarter lead, they held. Mm-hmm. They'd make the stops needed to win those games. That didn't happen this year. They blew a late lead against Ohio State. They blew a late lead against Marshall and against Stanford. That's on them.
Yep.
Did the offense play well in any of those games? No, the offense played bad in all three of those games. But they still had a lead late in the game of all three of those games. And an elite defense makes those plays. That's what we're saying. We're not saying that defense is the reason they lost. They should have only had a 14-13 lead against Stanford, but that's where they were, and they gave the lead back. So we got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I say that all the time here. We need to be able to say offense didn't play well enough, but the defense missed their chances to make plays too. We have to be – otherwise it becomes this is just personal for you now. And I'm not saying you, Michael, in specific. I'm saying in general. If you're always going to – when the defense does something wrong, you're always going to blame the offense, then it's no longer talking ball anymore or being honest and objective. You just clearly don't like that side. And that's not what we're going to do here. So, Michael, I'm with you. The offense played bad. They scored 10 freaking points against Ohio State. That's bad. They scored 21 points against a not very good Marshall team. Now, they ended up having a pretty decent defense, but the Notre Dame offense missed tons of opportunities in that game. Stanford, they should have scored 40 points against Stanford. They didn't. But you also can't deny the fact that in both games, they had a fourth quarter lead, and the defense gave up scoring drives right after that. That can't be denied either. We have to be honest about this. I'm not giving Tommy Rees a B this year. He gets a much lower grade. But B is also not good enough for the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. That's the reality of it as well. All right, Jared. Actually, another super chat from Mark Stewart. Thank you for this, Mark. Appreciate it. General recruiting. Do college coaches promise guys early playing time if a kid says it's important to him? Do they say whatever they have to? A lot do.
A lot too. A lot too.
Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
do. Not
Yeah.
all. Not all.
Not all.
Nick Saban's very good about this. You
Mm-hmm.
talk to kids that go to Nick Saban, he rarely promises kids early playing time. Rarely. And I know some instances where assistant coaches have gotten in trouble with him because they've tried to promise kids playing time.
Yeah.
Like they'll make promises, but they're usually financial ones or academic ones. They're not playing time ones. That's partly why they've been able to have the success they're playing. A coach that always would promise kids playing time is Urban Meyer. And I believe that's part of the reason that they never maximize their potentials, because same thing happened to Florida. He started off with this really strong foundation of team, and then started to recruit the stars from out of the region. And then all of a sudden it became about the attitude of the players, and they were never the same team. And I think that hurt him at Florida. That's why they collapsed at the end right after signing a couple big-time recruiting classes. And I think that hurt him at Ohio State. It's why they never quite achieved the success they need to achieve, and why Saban is just consistently over time. Because his thing is like, look, you don't want to be here. You don't want to compete. You don't want to be patient. That's fine. Cool. Go somewhere else.
And I think that's why this transfer portal stuff has been so weird with Alabama, right, Brian? Because usually Alabama doesn't lose a ton of players to transfer portal, because they actually are pretty honest with them for the most part, which is interesting.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to another one here. Thank you for that, Mark. Jared Rhodes says, one more question about supporting you guys. Which is a better way for you guys financially, YouTube or listening on podcasts? So first of all, both. But how do I say this? The payout for listening is better on the podcast than it is YouTube. Google is very much geared towards maximizing every possible way for them to take every dime possible. And that's okay. It's their business, right? We knew that when we signed up. Totally fine with it, right? Not a complaint. We knew exactly what we signed up for. It's just the podcast app is more lucrative for us. Same shows, but more lucrative. So, but we prefer both, right? And right now, CFB Nation, it's definitely the podcast because we're not monetized on YouTube. But we would appreciate if y'all could watch some of those videos, and when I put new ones up, just watch them and try to help us get up to 4,000 downloads, because if we can create another revenue stream, then that opens up opportunities for us to then take that revenue and put it towards growing our staff. Because Ryan knows what we do, and right, what do we do when we have a good year, Ryan? Y'all get a nice little something at the end of the year, and okay, we've done well. Let's go make a new hire. Let's expand our content staff, and so as much as I would like to put it into the Driscoll family, cruise fund, that's not where it goes. Trust me, I'm in desperate need of a new car. Our second car is completely broken down. But I've always said that the extra money we get will always go towards the business, not me. And so that's what we're doing. And that's why we're looking to expand the staff in 2023. When it'll happen, who it'll be, I don't know. But we're working. Here's an interesting one from Archer, our resident Ohio State fan. Which schedule is tougher, 22 or 23? Also, would you rather get Ohio State next year in game 4 or game 1 like this year? Ryan, I don't think it's close. I think 2023 schedule is much tougher.
Yeah.
Because it's deeper.
Schedule. It is a lot deeper.
You had USC, Clemson, and Ohio State just like this year. Mm-hmm. You get Clemson on the road, Ohio State at home. Ohio State may not be as good next year. That's the thought. Some people say, well, they're going to lose. Sometimes losses can be additions.
Addition by subtraction.
Right. Sometimes. And not because it's a bad thing, but sometimes the makeup of your team changes to maybe fit your style better or whatever. They get USC at home, so that part helps. But it's the rest of the schedule that I think is challenging too, is they play Ohio State and USC within the first 5-6 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
So they get those games early. Now they're both at home, which is good, but they got to go to Clemson in November. They also play at Duke, who we anticipate, who went 8-4 this year, and we anticipate being a good team this year. They play at Louisville, who just hired Jeff Brom. They're going to be good next year. They play at NC State, who just won, 8-9 games, right? Finished in the top 25. And they play Pitt at home, who's going to be decent. They're typical Narduzzi team, right? And then they also play Wake Forest at home. So I think next year's schedule The top three next year potentially may not be as good as the top three this year. I would say that's debatable. The counter to that would be, yeah, maybe they may not have the talent that they had this year, which again, debatable, but you get two of them at home this year as opposed to getting two of them on the road last year. Very true.
Right.
But the depth of this year's schedule was not great. And we talked about that before the season. Like after the top 3-4 teams, North Carolina was pretty good. Like it was a top three, big drop off, North Carolina, big drop off to everybody else. There's a lot more depth on that schedule next year of good teams. Wake Forest is a good team. Duke's a good team. Louisville's a good team. NC State's a good team. And you get all three of those on the road. And then Pitt's a quality team. So it's the depth of the schedule next year to me that makes it harder, Ryan, in my view.
I agree. Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, for his second part of the question, Brian, with Ohio State game 1 or game 4, I mean, my initial thought is I'd rather see them earlier in the season because I think that, I mean, they're going to be replacing CJ Stroud. Absolutely. Right. They're going to be replacing both their offensive tackles, Paris Johnson and DeJuan Jones. They're replacing potentially Luke Whippler from what I'm hearing. Cade Stover, maybe. I don't know if he's going to test the NFL waters. Then you got Zach Harrison's going to be off that team. Both defensive tackles, at least Teron Vincent and Jerron Cage. Tommy Eichenberg, you never know. Steel Chambers, you never know. Couple of safeties.
Archer had said during the show that Steel Chambers announced today that he's coming back.
That's good for him.
Is he? I don't know if that happened or not, but I'm just saying Archer said that during the show that he announced he's coming back.
I mean, either way, though, you're losing a lot, especially the offensive line is where I look at because they're not bringing in a great offensive line class this year either. I mean, their top guy right now is like Luke Montgomery, and
he's ranked high, but I'm not a big fan of him.
Yeah, so I mean, they have a lot of answers that need to happen at offensive line, and I mean, we expect Kyle McCord or Devin Brown, whoever the quarterback is, to be good, but first game of the season versus fourth game of the season, I mean, I'd rather take the first personally.
I'm fine either way, to be honest with you. Truly. I am. I mean, obviously there's, and the reason I say that is because I think next year's Notre Dame team is going to be interesting. You're going to have a different quarterback no matter what, because I count Tyler Buckner as a new quarterback because he only played three games this year. You're going to have I think a different look on offense. You're going to have some youth in spots on defense. I hope that you want to get those guys some experience. And plus you get the triple option out of the way early. And so next year, unlike most years, Notre Dame actually has 3 warm-up games before they get to Ohio State. Notre Dame normally doesn't have that. And I think next year's team is going to need it because I think next year's team has a chance to be really good, but there's going to be some new guys and new spots that are very important. You know, you're going to have a new Viper. You're going to have 2 new interior guys on the offensive line. Your line's going to need some time to get going. You know, last year you had to do that against an Ohio State team that went 11-1 and a Marshall team that went 8-4.
Yeah.
Next year you're doing it against Navy and Tennessee State. The point being, you could play exactly the same way next year in the first 2 games that you played against Ohio State and Marshall, and you're 2-0. And 3-0 because you get Central Michigan the next week. And so that's the thing for me is when you play that tougher schedule earlier, when your team needs time to develop because you don't necessarily have a really veteran team, playing a weaker schedule early allows you to get right the right way. I mean, Central Michigan went 4-8 this year, Ryan?
Something I believe. Like that. They weren't very good.
Yeah, and so good. I think those warm-up games are going to be needed next year for me. This year I felt like the reason I wanted this year to be different is because Ohio State had so many new coaches, and I thought Notre Dame's defense was going to be experienced enough that I don't want to give that Ohio State team 4 games to kind of get rolling. Right. And that kind of turned out to be accurate. I mean, you know, they kind of got rolling. Now, next year, the things the coaches are going to be back, but they're going to have a new quarterback and all that. I'm not really worried about that. I think Kyle McCord will be just fine in game 1 or game 2 or whatever. I think they'll be good there. It's more about I want Notre Dame to be the best it can be because I don't care what Ohio State does if Notre Dame's as good as it can be. That's the difference. Where this year is like you want to catch Ohio State at the right time because I didn't want to play Ohio State later in the year. Next year, if Notre Dame is the team I think they can be, I'll play you whenever. But give Notre Dame time to become that team first, as opposed to this year where they caught 2 L's before they finally hit their stride, and then now you're just kind of playing catch up all year. Right. You know, and so that's why I would say next year I'm kind of okay with them because they both Like, actually, I would argue Ohio State has a tougher 1-2-3 than Notre Dame does. They play at Indiana in the opener, and then they play Western Kentucky the week before, which is going to have an offense that can score, and then they play Youngstown State. I mean, I could be wrong here, but I believe Youngstown State is still a much better team than Tennessee State is, right?
Well,
Tennessee State's
not
some
if,
nice.
Not if Eddie George suits up for Tennessee State next year.
I know, right? Seriously. Hard pass on that. I don't want to deal with that action. But Youngstown State this year went 8-4. They lost to Kentucky. They lost at North Dakota by 13. They lost to North Dakota State by 13, and they lost to North Dakota by 5. Those are 3 good teams, and then they lost to Southwest Missouri State late as well. So, or Missouri State, which is, I believe, where Bobby Petrino is, correct?
That is correct.
And they lost that game by 3. So Youngstown's a good team. So both of them have kind of warm-ups, but I would argue Ohio State's going to be a little bit tougher the first 3 games than Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame gets hard after that, and that's another reason why I like the idea of the warm-up games, to kind of let your team get going, because once you get into that stretch, it's like, okay, there's no weeks off. No weeks off next year. And you want to kind of be as fresh as possible getting into that stretch.
It's a tough stretch, man. That's a really tough stretch.
Yep. Yeah, it is not going to be fun. But I think this team is good enough to do it if they can get their stride. It would be my question. So really good question, Archer. Really good question. And a good way to end. So, yes, I do think next year's schedule is going to be a battle. It's going to definitely be a battle. So last one, Irish Blooded. Speaking of Navy, any thought of the class it was to fire the Navy head coach in the locker room after the game? Seemed kind of like a Lane Kiffin on the tarmac kind of thing. Look, I don't know what actually happened, Ryan, so I want to get that out. I've only heard stuff like this.
Yeah.
I'll say this. What I do feel confident in saying that we know is what Ken Niumatalolo said afterwards, which is, I was told after the game I was being fired. I felt that was such an incredibly classless way for Navy to handle this. Navy's supposed to be better than that. This is a guy that gave you everything he had for a long time.
Yep.
Turned down job offers to stay at Navy, to deal with all the restrictions that you give him. And he was a loyal soldier for you. And I use that, obviously that term somewhat loosely when we're talking about the Naval Academy, but this is a guy that's been with you since 2002.
Wow.
He gave you 21 years of service because he was his O-line coach before he took over as a head coach in 2007. This guy led you to a conference championship game 3 times, I believe. Led you to 11 bowl games. And you're going to do him like that? Now, look, am I saying that they're wrong for firing him? No, I'm not. They went 3-7, 4-8, and 4-8 the last 3 years. Perhaps it is time for a change. Sure. It's not. It's like with anything. It's like with Dylan Edwards decommitting. I don't have a problem with Dylan Edwards decommitted from Notre Dame. If he feels somewhere else is better for him, do what you got to do. I have a problem with the way he did it. I have 100%. No problem with Drew Pine deciding to enter transfer portal. I have no problem with him deciding to enter transfer portal. I have a problem with the way he did it. Right? I have no problem with Navy deciding it's time for a change. I get that. I think Ken Niumatalolo might even acknowledge that, right? But it's the way that they did it. He deserved better than that. This guy won you 11 games twice, won you 10 games. You know how bad you were for the 40 years before he took over? You know what I mean? Paul Johnson kind of started it somewhat, but then that guy took you to new heights. He's not the one that forced you into a conference, which was one of the worst things for Navy. Joining the conference was the beginning of their downfall, in my opinion.
Because now teams see him every
year.
Yeah.
And so I just thought the way they did it was classless and disrespectful, and he deserved better than that, in my opinion.
And I've never heard anything negative about him as a person either. So, like, what does he? He is
a little arrogant, but like, he's a football coach.
Sure,
yeah,
that's every coach
And I thought early in I didn't think he showed respect for Notre Dame when they first started playing each other, but that changed over time. Like, some of his antics on the sideline just bothered me early on. It's like, dude, you're kind of being disrespectful a little bit, but it was fire, it was passion, it was energy, it was that stuff. It wasn't like Phillip Rivers taunting Jay Cutler from the other sideline, right? Where you're just like, dude, you're a prick. It wasn't that. It was just fiery but over time you could really sense the appreciation that he developed for that rivalry.
Right.
And I respect that. But he gave that program everything he had, and the manner in which they went about terminating him to me is a joke.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a Monday morning conversation in a closed room, right?
Right.
Like, not to embarrass someone like that.
Right.
It's just, yeah.
Yeah. It was, and right after the Army game too,
Uh-huh.
and I don't care how they lost. Like, I don't think he got fired because of how they lost. It's kind of like the thing with Herm Edwards. I kind of get Arizona State doing that with Herm because Herm did some shady stuff as the head coach there.
Yes, he did.
Right? Like,
Yes,
like you kind of tore this program down. You disrespected this job. You cheated. You did. You know what? You kind of brought this on yourself, cuz.
Right.
That's not true for Kenny Amatololo. It's not true for him. Like Lane Kiffin, like, okay, he was kind of same thing. Like, yeah, that guy got fired for reasons beyond just they lost a football game.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
With Kenny Amatololo, from everything I've ever been told, he was pure class.
Mm-hmm.
And he deserved better than that.
Yep.
In my opinion.
Agree.
And that's that. So, curious who their new have they announced a new head coach yet? I don't think they have, right?
So. I don't think so.
The next question is going to be, do they stay in the triple option? Do they believe that that's the only way they can win or not? That's going to be very fascinating.
Man.
I hope they hire someone that doesn't run the triple option. I would love that.
Air raid team.
I don't care. Just not the triple option. And this isn't about me hating the triple option. It's just the challenge of it would be great for Notre Dame not have to prepare for that. Right.
Yes, that's fair.
That's where I'm coming from. So, yeah, knowing my luck, they'll just add Army now every year. Navy goes away from the triple option. Notre Dame signs a 10-year contract with
Force.
Army.
Yeah,
or Air
somebody.
Force. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness gracious. That would be terrible. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for being with us today. We appreciate that. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We kind of like a little mini infomercial based on some of those questions we had during the show. We appreciate that greatly. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Listen to the website at irishbreakdown.com. Sign up for the channel, CFB Nation podcast channel. We would love it if you guys could watch some of those videos and help us get our watch hours up so we can eventually get that monetized and then grow that platform even more. And of course, subscribe to the CFB Nation podcast app too, because the numbers for that are really good right now, but that's because we're putting those shows on the Irish Breakdown RSS feed. I've ran a couple tests where I didn't put a show on the RSS feed for Irish Breakdown, and the plays were really, really low. So if you guys like that content that Irish Breakdown, the CFB Nation channel gives, make sure that you're going to it from as best you can from the CFB Nation app, because eventually we're going to transition all that stuff off of the Irish Breakdown app feed and put it just on CFB Nation, because I don't want it for perpetuity to be a bunch of non-Notre Dame stuff on the Irish Breakdown app. So we would like to eventually be just Notre Dame stuff. And that's where we're going to be. So check that out on the CFB Nation podcast app. You can find that on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. And then, of course, we have links to it in our different promotions and different things we're doing. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Y'all have a great rest of your day. Tonight, 6 o'clock, Sean and Vince are going to have their weekly mailbag. So check that out. And we will just say it now. Friday will be the return of the Friday Free-for-All mailbag. So the Friday Free-for-All mailbag is back. We will have that. It is now officially the off season. Obviously, we'll miss one because, there's a game, but it is back and back in force. And so that'll get rocking and rolling here as we move forward and close out the season. So Friday mailbag, we'll be back starting this Friday. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock again, talking more Notre Dame football. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. And we will see you again soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.